listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, fixated between the ever-expanding rift on our collective ideology. I'm your political analyst fighting for the right, Austin Pelly. Sounds like we're having a little bit of hard time connecting to Jamarl here. Jamarl is actually working from home today. He's feeling a little bit ill. So hopefully you'll be blessed with both our voices, but only my face for today.
There we are.
Jamarl.
Can you hear me okay? Yes. Can you hear me all right?
Yes. I'm dying to know, which corner are you fighting for?
I am fighting in the left corner. I'm your indefatigable, you're burning and burning the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
That means that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. Jamarl, what's going on, my man? Why can't I see your beautiful face this morning?
Oh, you can't see my beautiful face because I'm a bit under the weather this morning, but I'll be in tomorrow. It'll be fine. But I definitely wanted to be here, even though you can't necessarily see my beautiful face.
Well, you can text me pictures of it every hour on the hour to keep me satiated.
I know, right? I just keep sending them on Twitter every few hours.
Okay, sounds good, man. Feel better, rest up. We're going to have a great show for you guys. All starts with headlines. There's some good ones in here today, so you're going to want to pay attention, starting with COVID news. Yesterday in the United States, there were 253,782 new COVID cases reported, along with 2,598 deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 253,800 cases per day, a decrease of 62% from the average 2 weeks ago. 64% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 75% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 76,767,122 people across the US of A and killed 904,144 people. Officials in New Jersey, Connecticut, Delaware, California, and Oregon said on Monday that they will lift indoor mask mandates for schools and other public places in coming weeks, seeking a return to normalcy as soaring COVID-19 infections fueled by the Omicron variant abate. The changes signal a growing inclination by political leaders in those states, all led by Democrats, to take pandemic-wary residents off an emergency footing and shift towards policies that treat the virus as part of everyday life. Compulsory face coverings have proven especially fraught and politically heated in public education. 4 of the states announcing action on Monday, California being the exception, set hard deadlines for ending mask mandates in schools. In national news, Biden's top science advisor Eric Lander resigned Monday following reports of bullying and disrespect to subordinate staff. The resignation comes after insistence from the White House that Lander would remain in his position while receiving some correction and training to improve. In a statement, Lander wrote, quote, "I'm devastated that I caused hurt to past and present colleagues by the way in which I have spoken to them," end quote. Lander's departure constitutes the highest profile departure for the Biden team to date. And it's kind of egg on face for Biden because he took a hard no bullying stance as he was entering. He was going to try to keep him on. He resigned. So yeah, we'll see. Former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, he's back in the news. Why? Because he's seriously considering a political comeback as early as this year, 2 sources close to his inner circle told media, adding to a series of recent reports hinting at the Democrats' desire to resurrect his career after resigning in disgrace last summer. Cuomo, 64, faced impeachment and removal from office when he stepped down in August 2021 following a series of allegations of sexual harassment, which were detailed in a report by the state attorney general, and growing criticism over his handling of the pandemic, including his administration's release of misleading information about the death toll in nursing homes. The former governor expressed regret for resigning over the sexual harassment allegations against him and defiantly claimed that he's been vindicated by the court of public opinion. Can't wait to dive into that one. We're going to hit it in the headlines. We're going to talk. We got guests on it. It'll be great. In a 5-4 ruling, the Supreme Court put on hold a lower court's decision to redraw new congressional districts in Alabama before 2022 to increase black voting power. The current lines give Republicans a good chance of holding on to 6 of the 7 seats in the House of Representatives. In international news, diplomatic efforts to defuse the tensions around Ukraine continued today, with French President Emmanuel Macron arriving in Kiev the day after hours of talks with the Russian leader in Moscow yesterday, yielding no apparent breakthroughs. Macron met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as fears of a possible Russian invasion mount. Moscow has massed over 100,000 troops near Ukraine's border, but insists it has no plans to attack Ukraine. Macron told reporters that the talks with Putin allowed him to ensure that, quote, there's no degradation and no further escalation, end quote. For Russia's part, the Kremlin denied that Vladimir Putin had promised Macron that Russia would stage no further maneuvers near Ukraine for now, pouring cold water on a tentative French assertion of diplomatic progress. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson sang Gloria Gaynor's hit song "I Will Survive" according to his new communications director before discussing his appointment to try to reset his premiership after a series of political scandals. The pair reportedly launched into a rendition of the song after he asked the prime minister if he could survive. Johnson's premiership is in crisis amid anger over a series of alcohol-fueled events held at his Downing Street office and residence during coronavirus lockdowns, which followed other missteps. I want to address something here because I see it in the comments all the times. Why is Bojo back in the news for this? Why do we have to keep talking about this? Yeah, he did a party, so what? It's the nature of the cultural elites. I would be in the same boat. I think Jamal's in the same boat. He shouldn't lose his premiership for this. But the Brits, on the other hand, they're not in the same boat. There's a very large group that are trying to get him deposed for this. So that's why, as trivial as it sounds to us, or, I mean, you know, he didn't listen to his own mandates. Sure. Shame on you, but should you lose your position for it? I would say no. I think Jamal and I both agreed on that. Correct, Jamal?
Yeah, I don't think he should lose his position over it, but definitely
but will he is a very different question.
Yeah, right. I don't think he will. I mean, but he's definitely going to feel some heat over it. I mean, those things were extremely contentious. I mean, basically, they were telling people, you know, stay in your homes. They were fining, if I'm not mistaken, people who were kind of making these trips. So, yeah, Johnson, you had a lot of people who didn't necessarily want to deal with the lockdowns. And Johnson is out there basically having parties, telling people to bring their own liquor. So, yeah. He's going to take some heat over it.
Yeah, he definitely will, and we'll see what comes of it. And it's funny that as soon as he gets heat over it, he switches. Britain is all like, "Hey, no, now we're back to no vaccines and no mask mandates and all that."
Well, but that's why he's doing that.
Yeah,
that's exactly why he's doing that, because it's like, all right, you guys are giving me heat for doing this. Okay, how about this? Let's distract and let's just get rid of all of it. It's that part.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay. Good job, Bojo.
Yeah, so we'll see what comes with it. But we got more coming from the meeting yesterday between Olaf Scholz of Germany, who met with President Biden yesterday to coordinate and get on the same page about the two countries' reactions if Russia invades Ukraine. Joe Biden assured the public that keep in mind that language there, Joe Biden assured the public that if there is an invasion, then Germany will shut off the controversial pipeline Nord Stream 2. Scholz took a slightly more worried approach, but the two were apparently on the same page. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock as well was scheduled to arrive in Kiev, but that meeting has been canceled by the Ukrainians, touting German refusal to send weapons and give guarantees of shutting down Nord Stream 2. And that, of course, was according to CNN and American media, so let's see how realistic that is. We'll probably get someone on tomorrow to talk about it, but man, it's
Absolutely.
crazy. It's crazy that we're seeing Biden say, "Oh yeah, Nord Stream 2 will be shut down if Russia invades," and Germany the ones who will go freezing. Yeah, Scholz is.
But Scholz is not saying that.
He's not saying it.
Well, yeah, I know, but Biden has been very strong on his nose. He's like, "Oh, we'll stop it. We'll shut it down." And when they ask Scholz is like very vague, very non-committal. Biden is being real strong, and he's like, "We'll shut it down." Well, they tried to shut it down once before. Trump tried to shut it down most of his entire presidency. And even when Biden comes in, it's like, okay, so what are you going to do? Are you going to sanction Germany? Is that what you're going to do in order to shut down the pipeline? Meaning, this is an issue of Germany's, I'm not going to call it national security, but whether they freeze to death or not, it's somewhat of a big deal to Germany. And so Scholz is not going to get out there and say something crazy like that, despite Biden being all that strong on it. I guess the most interesting thing to me is Scholz just started. So he doesn't have this kind of stature of an Angela Merkel. And he's coming in with the American president basically giving him a dress down, trying to get him on the same page. And despite all of that, he's still being non-committal.
Yeah,
So
and I didn't include the quotes because, they tell the same story, but Schultz basically said, we would sanction Germany really hard. We would be in line with the U.S., but those sanctions would also hurt Germany in a way that wouldn't hurt U.S. That's pretty much the language that he used.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, we've got the U.S. Biden saying, yep, they're going to shut it down. But then we also have Ukraine saying they refuse to give guarantees to shut it down. So we're not going to even engage in conversations.
Wow.
So it's sticky for sure. We'd love to explore it later. We still got a couple more headlines, just a few here. In tech news, singer-songwriter Neil Young has asked employees of Spotify to quit their jobs while urging people to withdraw their money from big American banks in protest over coronavirus misinformation and climate change. Meanwhile, social media platform Rumble has offered Joe Rogan $100 million to bring his podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, to its video platform. And controversy surrounding his show on Spotify, amid the controversy, yes. Rumble CEO Chris Pavlovsky wrote in an open letter on Monday that he stands with Rogan, who is facing blowback for COVID-19 vaccine misinformation on his show and his past use of racial slurs. Former President Donald Trump also threw his hat into the ring, asserting, quote, Joe Rogan is an interesting and popular guy, but he's got to stop apologizing to the fake news and radical left maniacs and lunatics, end quote. In holiday news, we'll get back to that one. Yeah, but in holiday news, today is Safer Internet Day, National Boy Scout Day, and in Qatar, it's National Sports Day. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. Jack, can I ask you to look up what is the national sport of Qatar? Because it's their National Sports Day. I would imagine, like, if it was National Sports Day here, it would basically be the Super Bowl, which is coming up this Sunday.
I'm guessing soccer. I'm going to guess soccer, but I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, I don't want to make a prediction till I know a little bit, but Rogan's getting a new $100 million deal.
I saw that. I mean, my first thought was, does Rumble even have $100 million? Do they have that much money to basically give Rogan like that?
Let me ask you, have you heard of Rumble before this?
Well, yeah, that's the platform. I get the joke, right? It's like, who's on Rumble? But, I mean, yeah, I've heard of Rumble before this. I know it was kind of this conservative outlet. I got to be honest, both of those things are bad for Rogan. Like, it would be horrendous for Rogan to go to Rumble. Like you said, who's heard of Rumble, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think Rogan wants to be pigeonholed as a right-winger in the way that Rumble is kind of this kind of right-wing audience stuff. I mean, Rogan is exactly where Rogan needs to be. He's this kind of universal person. And so he kind of should be on Spotify. That's more of a lightning rod to bring people on. Also, Donald Trump is giving him horrible advice. I agree with Trump that there's some things he shouldn't apologize for. Meaning, if you know somebody is coming after you just for the sake of coming after you, don't apologize for that, especially if you don't believe you did anything wrong. If, however, you do believe legitimately that you did something wrong, apologize for it. It shouldn't have to be an issue of politics for something like that, especially for Rogan, who's basically his claim to fame as being the everyman. If he believes earnestly, okay, that looks horrendous, I shouldn't have did that, that is taken poorly, then he should say, look, I'm sorry for that, my bad. I'm going to be better at that. If it's something he doesn't, then he shouldn't apologize for it. It's very straightforward. I don't necessarily think Donald Trump is giving him the best advice in the world on that, because Rogan doesn't take the opportunity to apologize for everything. Like, it's not like Rogan spends his days apologizing. When the vaccine stuff came up, what did he do? He brought Sanjay Gupta on and basically roughed him up on air. And so, I think I think part and parcel to the reason that I like him, and I think other people like him, is because he's a person. And people apologize when they get it wrong.
Well, let me ask you, when Trump was kicked off of Twitter, there was talks, and I'm pretty sure he even announced that he was starting his own social media platform.
Yeah. It's called Truth. I think it's called Truth.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. What do you see? What would happen if Trump offered $100, or I guess he could offer way more, $200 million deal to Rogan to bring him to that platform?
I don't think Rogan would leave Spotify.
Really?
I just don't buy it. I don't think it does anything for him. Would you want, for example, from the standpoint of your public perception, do you want to be considered pigeonholed as a right winger, or do you want to be just kind of Rogan? Meaning, if I'm
would
Rogan,
you say
I wanna
Rogan's
have-
not a right winger?
Yeah, I don't think he's a right winger.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't buy the notion that Rogan's a right winger. I mean, if you get him talking about healthcare, if you get him talking about policy, oftentimes he'd be in center or left, I would argue, even though he may take certain other positions that people may call culture war stuff. But no, I guess that's kind of my basic point, though. He's not a right winger. And so it's like him being on Trump's platform or Rumble, I think it kind of cuts one of his arms off. I think his best placement is how can I get the mass audience or how can I get the most views or bang for my buck? Spotify is probably his best spot, or YouTube, something like that.
Well,
but I don't think he should pigeonhole himself.
For now, I mean, Spotify is getting massive amounts of blowback. Imagine being Spotify and all you're trying to do is just be a platform, and all of a sudden you've got artists pulling out left and right. You're having mainstream artists that are asking your employees to quit, and you're just getting dragged through the mud after a massive purchase that I think it's safe to assume they haven't really turned a profit on yet. I doubt they've made $100 million on Rogan just yet.
Yeah, not that fast. There's no way. I don't buy that fast. But what do you think they're going to do with that? I mean, do you think that this pressure is enough? I mean, look, at the point when you invest that much money into somebody, you're not going to abandon them overnight.
Well,
I just don't buy that.
Also, Rogan is just a cash cow. If you have him, it's not that like I've invested that much and I need to look at this at a monetary perspective. If I'm going to lose $100 million from keeping him on, it's that if you keep him on, you're just gonna get 30 million viewers a day, whatever he sets out his podcast. So,
very true.
There's
very
that,
true.
yeah. For a little bit of context,
I don't think you get rid of him.
Yeah,
personally,
definitely not yet. We'll see how much steam this gets because at some point, if it gets overwhelming, Spotify would have to get rid of him. But we'll see how much steam this gets. And before we close, a little bit of context here. Coming in from Paul, we got Jimmy Dore and Glenn Greenwald are also on Rumble, so it's not just a right site. And then Jack did tell us that. Well,
Glenn is
sure.
I mean, Dore is questionable. I mean, look, that's a little bit more complicated. I mean, because Glenn Greenwald has been trending pretty hard right recently. And so is Dore, oddly enough. I mean, he's been getting into the vaccine stuff. I mean, Dore is considered a lefty usually, but he's been taking some kind of, he's going off the cliff on some of that stuff. But I feel you. I mean, it's not, I would imagine there's some elements that are not entirely right wing, but it's considered a right wing thing. And I think for Joe Rogan, is that what Rogan really wants? Like, if you're Rogan, do you really want to pigeonhole yourself into an aspect of the right, or do you want to have yourself as just open for pretty much anybody who wants to?
If it's the only platform that is allowing themselves to be a platform and not trying to take down, 113 of your episodes that's not as susceptible to cancel culture, maybe eventually if he gets pushed that far.
If he gets pushed off, then fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
But so far, Spotify is standing by him.
Yeah, we got to close though. But Jamarl, to answer my question earlier and your prediction, it is correct. The national sport of Qatar is European football. So, gold star for you.
Nailed it. Excellent. All right, you guys are listening to Fault Lines. Thomas and Pelly. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show.
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys happen to find yourself in the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM at 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are thinking what Austin and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So we mentioned this yesterday. The White House on Monday released a report outlining dozens of steps that intends to promote unions. Now, if you remember, at the point where Biden was running, he said he was going to basically do either initially the PRO Act, but eventually that boiled down to, okay, I'm going to create a workers' task force. And that workers' task force is going to focus on promoting unionship. Now, here's the rub. There's a difference between the optics of something versus the reality of something. We have a professor coming on later today, John Logan, and we're going to talk to Ted Rall about it also. But before they get on, I kind of want to delve into this a little bit. Unionization has suffered tremendously in this country. At one point, you had unions that were at the very least backed by the Democratic Party, and there was this kind of relationship between the two where both kind of bolstered the other. But at a certain point, you had the situation where Democrats backed away from unions, and the voice of workers that was enunciated through unionization basically fell silent. And as that fell silent, even though productivity went through the roof, gains for workers basically flatlined. Now, from Biden's standpoint, he came in saying, I am a union guy. I'm going to back unions. And so unions wanted him to pass the PRO Act. Now, the PRO Act was basically a unionization effort that would have protected and promoted unions across the United States. Despite giving lip service to it, Biden didn't back it. Biden gave it lip service and then said, I'm going to pass a workers' task force. And if I'm not mistaken, Kamala Harris was basically the person heading up that task force. Now, it is true that they're given around 70 recommendations. But again, I want to point out there's a difference between wanting to look like you're doing something versus actually doing it. Looking like you're doing something is a workers' task force. Actually doing something is putting your energy, weight, and pressure in the bully pulpit behind passing the PRO Act. There's a difference in those things. One is a direct push for unionization. One is a direct push to increase workers' wages and workers' participation in regards to labor unions. The other one is the optics. The other one is dancing on a stage with people being able to see you and everything else, when the reality of it is what you're doing is little to nothing. This is optics. He wants the publicity for it. He wants the headline saying Joe Biden is pushing for unions. However, what Joe Biden knows is if he really does push for unions, if he really does put his emphasis behind that, then certain vendors, certain people who give money to the Democratic Party, be it soft or hard, certain people who back Democratic candidates, if any of those people would be directly harmed, or if the unionization will be against those companies' profits, then the Democratic Party will lose out. There's a contradiction in the Democrats' supposed policy position versus their need for revenue. And I would say this highlights that just as well as $15 an hour minimum wage. When it comes down to something that benefits the working poor or the working population, these guys aren't going to be backing you for it. Yes, they want credit for it. Yes, they want the optics. Yes, they want the headline. But no, they're not going to do anything legitimate that is going to make real and legitimate gains in a way that people can feel in their pocket, in a way people could feel in their wallet. And so the best that you're going to get is the optics. It's going to be a report. It's going to say, here's 70 things that we could do to increase unionization. When really the reality of it is there was one big thing that the president could have did, and that was backing the PRO Act. Austin, you and I've had this conversation about the Biden administration. And I think you've said it often where you've said this administration seems like it just cares about optics. Yeah. Like the reality of things seems to matter less than giving this impression of it. I mean, even in the Ukraine issue, it's like, okay, we're going to be really tough. We're going to invade. And then later on, it's like, okay, there's no military solution here. It's like, well, wait a minute. You were sounding pretty boisterous once before. Or even the Afghanistan thing. It's like, no, they're not going to be people who are hanging out of airplanes, and which invariably people hanging out of airplanes. It just seems like he lacks an ability to get that stuff across. I mean, even the $15 an hour minimum wage or the legalization of marijuana. When Joe Biden was running for office, all of those things were things that he said he was going to do. Even after he got in office, he was still saying $15 an hour was a starvation wage. And yet, the president, when confronted or given the opportunity to basically push for not having a starvation wage, he let it fall. He didn't do it. He didn't have to follow through on it. In fact, he started downing his own plan, saying, I don't think this is going to pass. I don't think I'm going to be able to get this through Congress. And of course, Republicans said, we agree with you, Mr. President. The $15 an hour is not going to pass. I guess my point is, it's one thing to say it. It's another thing to do it. And this administration, I suspect, a large part of the reason why it's falling so miserably in the polls is because that follow through is just not there. It's an issue of optics, not an issue of action. What are your thoughts?
I'm incredibly frustrated that I have to keep saying this again and again, but this is Biden's forte. This is all that he does. It's symbolism, recommendation, promises, and optics. That's it.
Yep.
None of those things are actual physical acts. And while I don't think it's bad for a politician to be perceived as or try to get the perception of fighting for the cause, even though it's a hard battle or they may not win it, but by every single act, quote unquote, that you do is a promise, is something that might come that you, and then half of those that you abandon later down the line. It's like the American public are waking up to it and you are just not able to do anything. And I don't know if it's him being this old now. I mean, I'm not the most educated on what Senator Biden was like. So, I mean, Jamarl, let me turn that to you then. So how is the difference between President versus Senator Biden?
So, I mean, honestly, Joe Biden, well, for one, he's slower, dramatically so.
Right.
I mean, Biden, back in the old days, Biden was always a hawk when he was in Congress. He was always aggressive. I mean, Biden at one point was chastising Ronald Reagan for not killing enough people with the death penalty, for God's sake. I mean, this is the person we're talking about. Biden was like, I don't care about the issues associated with people when they're growing up. We're going to put them in prison, saying that Biden did everything on it, hang jaywalkers or something. Like, he used to be very aggressive on this notion of criminal justice, locking people up, all that stuff. And yeah, he was even going after Reagan one time because Reagan wasn't using the death penalty or something to that effect. And so as he's gotten older, he's gotten far dramatically slower. Even if you go back and look at the debate between him and Sarah Palin, it's a different person. It's a fundamentally different person. Like, it's not there. And here's the rub, though. The reason I didn't vote for Biden is because I didn't believe Biden was going to follow through on any of that stuff. That's why I didn't vote for him. My thought was, okay, if Biden gets in and surprises me, okay, fair enough. But nothing in his 47 years in office got across that he was going to be a lefty. Or nothing in his 47 years in office got across that Biden was going to do something dramatically different. If anything, he said it himself, nothing is going to fundamentally change. Mm-hmm. And he meant it. Nothing is going to fundamentally change. That was the true thing that he said.
Right. Jamarl, if I can go back to your soapbox rant, one part you were talking about was he could have, he could have done a lot by now, but he could have actually made moves on unionization, but that would spell trouble for the Democrats. I want to push to something that we've talked about before. What about this possibility of actual politicians' staff unionizing? Because if he pushes for unionization, especially after his top science guy right now just resigned over bullying and mistreatment of his subordinates. So what if those subordinates unionize? What would that do for the Biden presidency?
Oh, great point. Great point. Because you remember Bernie Sanders allowed his staff to unionize. Like, push for it. He's a true believer, right? Mm-hmm. He knows it was going to cost them more money to do it. He knows that they were going to get more rights and everything else, but he did it because he believed it was right. I don't have this belief that Biden administration is going to have that. Like, that's what I mean. I think this stuff is optics. Like, for example, there was this proposal that would allow the post office, the people to cash checks at the post office. Now, the reason for this is obvious, right? You don't have to have banker's fees. People may have access to a post office, but even though they may not necessarily have a bank account, well, of course, they're going to walk that back too. I mean, so it's like the things that would be dramatically beneficial are almost out of reach, especially if it's going to come at cross purposes with the Democrats' ability to increase their revenue from, donations and everything else. They just work at cross purposes. I mean, there's no philosophical contradiction in Republicans. There is in Democrats. And the further you go to the left, the more that contradiction gets wider. Now, it's one thing if the people are just crowdsourced. Like if you're like an AOC or something, you're basically making the bulk of your money from people giving small dollar donations. But if you're a cinema or a mansion or just an average Democrat, then yeah, if you're pushing for 15 an hour minimum wage, or if you're pushing for Medicare for all, or if you're pushing for an expansion of Social Security, those things are invariably going to run up against people and groups and companies that don't want those things to go through, in which case they are not going to give you revenue. And not just that, you make this point yourself all the time, how the level of influence that corporations have in political circles. Well, that influence gets leveraged behind the scenes. That influence gets leveraged in the way that they kill certain programs. And I would wager to you that this very specific issue of the PRO Act was killed because of that level of influence, or at the very least, the suspected or the fear that that influence would be brought to bear if Joe Biden and the Democrats pushed for it.
Man,
that's the reality of it.
It's crazy, man. But I hear you. We got to close here. We're gonna be coming back with our guests. We're gonna talk about the Iran negotiations. But for now, you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly here on Radio Sputnik. We'll be right back after this break.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. And we've been having this conversation basically on the Iranian negotiations, the JCPOA. Those talks, I believe it's the 8th round of talks, are opening again, indirect talks to be precise, between Iran and the U.S. and several other nations that were involved in the JCPOA on reinstating the JCPOA negotiations. This has not necessarily gone out that well, and there have been all sorts of hiccups in regards to this negotiation, but let's get the down low, seeing that it's going to resume. To speak about this and have a conversation about it, we're joined with Professor Rafael Morello. He's a geopolitical analyst and assistant professor at the Faculty of Persian Literature and Foreign Languages, Amela Tabata University of Tehran, an invited lecturer at the Master's Program in Geopolitics and Global Security at Sapienza University of Rome. Professor Morello, thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
Good morning to you and to the people listening. Many thanks. Everything is fine. Today is a nice day in Tehran, actually. So I'm here at your disposal to enjoy the conversation.
Oh, thank you. And I appreciate that. We've been following these negotiations with the JCPOA. Trump, of course, pulled out. And he pulled out when Iran was actually, by all accounts, attending to the agreement. Basically, they were following the agreement. The U.S. is the one that basically pulled out the agreement, ramped up sanctions, ramped up a pressure campaign. And from that standpoint, Iran stayed with the deal for another year. Eventually, they pulled out. But at that point, the U.S. had already been out of the deal. So now they're trying to basically have these indirect negotiations in order to come back to some kind of agreement or some kind of modified JCPOA. Where are they so far with these agreements? I mean, up to this point, they're just having indirect negotiations. What is the perspective of the Iranian government towards these negotiations currently, considering that it was the U.S. that pulled out the first time around?
Yeah, that's, we have been working on this dossier. You should consider that the negotiations for the JCPOA, the international agreement between Iran and the international community, took 8 years of conversation, let's say, of diplomacy, plus 2 years of real engaged conversation. So 10 years to reach the agreement. And then it took just the President Trump a few days to turn it apart and to create a huge problem for the international community, for the Europeans, undermine international law. So actually, Iran didn't pull out of the deal. The only country that formally pulled out of the deal is the United States. So there is still a deal, and they're working on the deal. It will be very difficult to reach a new deal. The problem with the deal is that when Trump pulled out, there was a situation globally in terms of geopolitics, but also in terms of development of nuclear energy in Iran. Because Iran de-escalated its commitments towards the deal, now it has developed even more in terms of nuclear energy. So the problem is that we have a deal that was signed at a certain point in time where there was a certain situation, but now we have moved forward. So the problem is, on one side, how we scale back again Iran's nuclear development. It's very difficult. And on the other side, from the Iranian perspective, how we can trust the United States. They pull out of the deal, they imposed sanctions, they added more sanctions, they killed one of our best generals, they put, a whole series of situations. So from the perspective of Iran, the problem is the credibility of the United States as an international actor that respects international law and treaties. There is a good predisposition from the Iranians' part. They were in the negotiations, they signed the deal, they respect the deal, as you pointed out, for an entire year. Once Trump pulled off, they are still in the deal, and they want the deal to be revived. So you can say everything about the Iranians, but they are not respecting international norms and international rules when it comes to the deal that they signed between the G5 at the time, so major the members of the Security Council of the United Nations, if you wish, minus the United States. So there is a goodwill, and my perspective is that I'm optimist, actually, I have to say, in terms of reviving the deal, because in certain respects, this is a manufactured crisis. There is a long misunderstanding between Iran and the United States. But believe me if I tell you that from my perspective, if the United States has issues on the international arena, Iran is not a major issue. So spending all this energy, all these sanctions to isolate Iran, it doesn't make much sense.
Rafael, I'm curious, you said yourself you're optimistic for this deal to go through. If it does, what would it look like? Because I know that there's talks and there's some articles out there saying that it would be a much weaker deal, especially with the U.S. history of not really sticking to it. So what might Iran look for in this deal that they didn't initially?
So let's consider that Iran has been under sanctions for the last 40 years, since the revolution, basically. At the beginning, they tried to have a relation with the United States, then there was a misunderstanding, some occupation of the U.S. embassy, and then the crisis, and then a crisis after crisis after crisis. So the point of perspective of Iran about the deal is that they have a legitimate development program as regards nuclear development. So they will continue on that. What they need is access to the international market. They are isolated in terms of access to international market because it is controlled by the dollar, as you know very well. And so a series of sanctions unilaterally imposed by the U.S. reflects, on the population at large. I can tell you a very small example. I was invited some years ago at Princeton University to present a paper. The paper was published in a book just 2 months ago, but the publisher in Great Britain couldn't send me the book. It's a book, academic stuff, because the country is isolated. Although there aren't sanctions that officially prohibit sending books for the publisher to Iran, because of the sanctions of the United States, a series of actors, in particular security insurances, and bank sector do not engage Iran. What Iran is looking for is access to the market and, most importantly, the possibility to sell its oil. Iran is actually selling its oil because people need oil, people need energy. So China is buying oil and other actors are buying oil, but indirectly. So Iran is facing a loss of revenue in this respect. This is the main point of the Iranians: access to the international market and possibility to sell the oil according to international law. That will be a lot for the Iranians just because they don't trust the United States. So a minimum agreement will be, okay, so we are back on the international market. Let's people come and invest if possible, but already if we can sell our oil and access medicines, access, it's simple things really, that will be huge for us because Iran already has huge possibilities. It's been contained for 40 years, but because it's, in terms of oil and gas, the country is 3 times France, the population, the education, it has enormous possibilities. So a small opening will be a lot for Iran. They are not optimistic in the sense of a grand bargain, but yes, why not a small agreement that just can reintegrate Iran more properly in the international community and let the United States focus on the real challenges that it faces.
So if I could just follow up on that real quick. You were talking about the Iran and oil and how it would play into this negotiations. Well, I mean, we're seeing headlines of oil falling from a 7-year high of $94 per barrel. So how does that factor into these talks?
Yeah, that is relevant. But when people, focus a lot only on oil, and I mentioned oil, but I also mentioned gas. People don't realize because Iran is not being known on the international market as a gas seller. But according to BP, British Petroleum, which is actually a society that was born in Iran at the time of when Great Britain was a great empire, Iran has the most important gas reserve in the world, more than Russia. That is a debate, is Iran the first, is Iran the second, but there are huge possibilities. Let's consider now the crisis in Europe between NATO and Russia and all the threats, the presumed threats, because they are not real threats. Russia has an interest in selling gas to Europe and Europe in buying gas. The problem is another place. But let's imagine Iran is now exporting properly its gas to Europe, which is in need on the international market, and more properly the oil to China and to other actors, because nowadays Iran sells most of its oil to Asia. So it's Japan, Korea, all these series of actors. It's not the oil that is selling to the United States or to Europe properly. So there are different perspectives. Oil is a major perspective because Iran is a major actor, was historically a major actor in terms of selling oil on the international market. But you will hear a lot about gas if everything goes well in the near future, about Iranian gas.
Professor, I wanted to get into, and I want to get your take on I think it's fascinating politics, to put it mildly. So when Donald Trump pulled out of the deal, basically he burned what I would consider burning the moderates, meaning there were people like Hassan Rouhani, who was instrumental, who came into office and allowed that deal to basically go through. Well, when Trump pulled out, the people who were the moderates in that country basically were burned. Now, from the standpoint of Raisi coming in, from my standpoint, or from my take, it seemed as if part of the reason for increasing the enrichment was to show how there was no military solution or no viable solution, that basically, yeah, we're going to ramp up our uranium. You can't do anything about it. And not just can't do anything about it, we're going to get across to you how bad of an idea it was that you basically pulled out of the deal. Am I right on that? Meaning, it's the enrichment program and everything else that Iran was going through after the U.S. pulled out of the deal was to try to expose how there were no other options than the JCPOA? Or was there another rationale behind it?
Yeah, no, you are completely right on mostly of everything you said, in the sense that there is no military options vis-a-vis Iran. I invite people listening to us to take a map, a watch, because geography is relevant. I understand from a common listener to radio, Nicaragua or Japan, it's country, it's a name, Qatar, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia. Take a map and look at Iran, where it is in its position, how big it is, how many citizens, what reserves, what level of education, the military, the Pasdaran, and the intelligence. So there is no military option vis-a-vis Iran. That will be, a huge proportion. If you consider how badly ended up ages ago in Vietnam, and then in Iraq, and then in Afghanistan, Iran really will be just a blow up completely. It will change, the dynamics. So there is no one seriously thinking about the military solution. So what we do, and Iran is conscious of it. So what Iran says, okay, you wish to put pressure, go ahead. You will need a certain point to reach an agreement because you have serious problems coming forward. China, Russia, which is always a problematic country vis-a-vis the United States and NATO. There are major issues on the international arena, and Iran is a small relevant, but as the relevance of the Iranian dossier has been blown out of proportion when you even watch really realistically from the perspective of the United States. The other point that you made is very important. The reformists, if the point of the sanctions, of all the propaganda, of all the discourse in the United States is to democratize Iran, what Trump did, pulling out of the deal, was to put the reformists in complete disarray. At this point I'm speaking, the reformists are, they don't exist basically. They are out there. They need to come back together. But at this point in time, there is no trust of the population in the reformists. And the reformists don't trust themselves in the sense that, to a certain extent, they've failed putting trust in Europe. And it's real. it's a tragedy if you wish to have a very diverse, of course, political spectrum. So this is the reality. We're completely, clean from the political perspective. They are there because there is this very democratic sentiment in Iran, Republican sentiment. So you will see them come back at a certain point. But at this point, they don't have a major politician. They don't have a major program. Their program was the agreement. All Rouhani said, we will reach an agreement with the international community, the United States. Most of his government were people who had studied in the United States. He himself studied in Great Britain. So Europe is fine, nice. The United States is trustable. Let's reach this agreement, and Iran will become the nicest country on earth. So I'm simplifying, but that didn't realize.
Raphael, what about China? China with these negotiations seems to be pushing really hard for implementation of JCPOA. So do you think that China is going to spearhead these negotiations and conversations more so than the U.S. because, we can't be trusted?
Yeah, the point is that where there is an interest, there is a will, in the sense that China has a strong interest in Iran. It's not the only country. They have been developing better than the United States in Asia. That is the real challenge of the United States. The United States has been falling behind in this. So the relation of China with Pakistan, with even Russia, with Iran, with other actors in Asia, Saudi Arabia, actually, the Cooperation Council, the GCC, and other countries, Syria, has been growing. This of Red Belt Initiative, this idea of China building all this infrastructure to basically sell things to Europe, is this materializing slowly, but it is real. So from the perspective of China, they want to buy oil from Iran, as they buy oil already from Iran, but better, as they buy from Saudi Arabia. They need oil, they need energy, they need gas from Russia, and etc. And they also need Iran as a transit, because Iran, geographically speaking, again, is in a transit position, which is fundamental in this Road the Belt initiative. The problem, from my perspective, if I was a US politician, I would try to bring Iran back on my side instead of alienating Iran. Because in the near future, because where it is, the energy, the population, the market, and everything, it will be a major secondary actor at the level of Brazil, of Mexico, if you wish, but in a very sensitive area of the world, because still this area is extremely relevant in terms of energy and geopolitics.
I'm curious, how does Biden's weakness at home play into the negotiations? Like you said, if part of the issue is that the U.S. reneged on the deal, then trust is a big part of that, right? Because if Biden is not there, then you have to basically trust that the next president is going to basically follow through. And there's no way to know if that next president is going to be Joe Biden or who that's going to be. So I would imagine Iran has to take that into consideration in any of these negotiations.
Yeah, of course. There are two perspectives. Internal politics in the U.S. is relevant. In perspective, considering who will be the next president. And this is why the Iranians don't trust, and the Europeans, let me tell you the truth, don't trust the United States as an international actor no more. That is real. Yes, I know very well many EU diplomats and politicians that cannot go on TV and say anything like that. But beyond closed doors, that is the reality. So the problem is, okay, what we do. In terms of internal politics, that's in the United States, that could affect if next president, it's even Trump himself or someone with that kind of perspective, although I don't see any politician that really resembles Trump in the United States. Will be a right-wing politician, but Trump was very peculiar in terms of president. In terms of how strong is Biden within politics, the political establishment now in the United States, that is relevant for the negotiations. Why? Because some of the sanctions are imposed by the United States, by the president, if you wish. So there are a lot of waivers that the president can use to mitigate the sanctions. But other sanctions are from the Congress. And that always has been a serious issue in terms of sanction generally, because Congress has been acting in respect when it comes to sanctions even more ruggedly than the president. So if you consider all, these right-wing politicians in the United States with all a very old-fashioned idea of Cuba, of Iran, I mean, they lived 50 years ago. Tell them that the bipolar system fall apart 3 decades ago now. The world has changed. Please wake up. Just look at how geopolitics, and now he's forget about the Cold War. I mean, the sanctions against Cuba, that is, one of the most ridiculous things in history of humanity. Run a 6-year sanctions, for a small island. What's the problem about Cuba and the United States now? I mean, really, be serious. Iran is the same. Iran is a much bigger country, so you have to engage more seriously about Iran. But blow it out of proportion because 40 years ago, they challenged the United States once the United States 2 decades earlier had organized a coup against a democratic elected prime minister in Iran and changed the democratic history of the country. I mean, let's be more honest and serious, please.
What about? I mean, we've hit many times on Biden being an optics-driven presidency, as we even talked about at the beginning of the show. What does it say, though, that, I mean, it's pretty easy to say, okay, Biden would go into these negotiations and then he'd come out and be like, we're going to do it again, maybe not actually move on it. But what does it say? Are we seeing a different Biden going into these conversations at the fact that, I believe it was 2 days ago, his administration waived sanctions relating to Iran's civilian nuclear activities? Is it saying that he's really legitimately ready to actually get something done and bring something to the table?
So that, again, you have to be serious also about that. I mean, that was the discourse of the media, but he waived the sanctions, which is one of the major issues about the sanctions. Even Obama didn't take out the sanctions. He waived the sanctions. What does it mean? That for 3-6 months, every time, he says, okay, there are these sanctions, but let's freeze them. The sanctions are there. We only freeze them. If Iran then does something wrong, we put everything back. This is why Trump, in a couple of days, could put all the sanctions back. And that is a serious issue in the negotiations. It's, just, okay, the waivers are nice, but you cannot have a foreign policy based on waivers on the long run. So I don't know how they are discussing that in detail, because they're being more quiet in this time, if you wish. Also, the very Biden has not been very open about the negotiations. Even European Union have been very mild because of the bruised precedently. So the point is this, that we know that this issue of Iran was an issue 20 years ago. So there is need for non-proliferation. But Iran is a signatory of the NPT, the most important treaty for non-proliferation. At the time of the JCPOA, even Iran accepted additional provision of the NPT. Consider Israel is not a signatory of anything, is not a signatory, or any other country. So Iran is the most monitored country in the history of humanity when it comes to nuclear negotiations. So let's just put the crisis of the United States and Iran in a serious perspective, scale it down, and move forward.
How do you think this is going to ultimately turn out? I mean, I know you said in the beginning you were somewhat optimistic. Are you optimistic that they're going to come to some agreement? Because at this point, they're not even talking directly. I mean, they're still going through indirect talks.
Yes and no. That is a kind of, theater stuff, in the sense that Iran and the United States, not at the highest level, but through diplomats, have always been in a direct talk. They cannot say that openly because, we are the enemy and the enemy of my enemy. So the presidents have not, so the president of the United States and the president of Iran, although the head of state in Iran is the leader, have not spoken directly except for the case of Rouhani. So they leave it to diplomats, even the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but there are people from both political establishment that speak directly. So the idea that don't speak directly is a kind of a little theater, I have to say. Of course, if they engaged more openly about that direct speech, so people at the highest level meeting, that will help diplomacy. I mean, let's be honest about that. Still, I mean, the European Union is willing to mediate. It slows down the process, but at the end of the day, the problem, believe me, is not about the nuclear program in Iran. The problem is a political decision that must be taken by the highest echelon of the state of the United States and Iran. Iran already took that decision and was consistent respecting that decision. The United States must do the same because it is in its interest really to scale down this manufactured crisis and focus its attention on most serious challenges. So how it will play out? I hope, I mean, from the perspective of Iranians, I hope for them that what they are, but let's say that I think that what they are proposing is take some sanctions actually out, and where you cannot take the sanctions out, those of the Congress use waivers, but take out as many sanctions as possible and just limit the use of waivers, because waivers can be done and undone in a couple of minutes.
Raphael, if I could get...
what if they don't? What if they don't do that?
Sorry?
Meaning, what if they don't reach a deal? What are your expectations?
The deal is already there. So if they don't get, this is why I'm telling you, there are not high expectations in Iran. In particular with this government. Yes, the previous one had high expectations that were, as you can see, partly or highly misplaced, how you see that. So what is the current administration doing very seriously and consistently is look east in general. So not only Asia, but for example, Latin America. So we have this problem with the United States. We cannot solve this problem with the United States because they are not trustable. They are not reliable. Mm-hmm. What is option B? Let's engage our neighbors. Let's engage those countries that are willing to be with us in Latin America or in Asia. And slowly, let's try to integrate economically within the Russian economic system, the China economic system, and you can say parallel or different system. Of course, they would slow down Iran's development. So Iran has an interest in reaching a deal because they need to develop. They've done so in the last 40 years, despite the sanctions, but the pace of the development has not been as good as it could be given the potential of the country. So if they can reach the agreement, let's put it fast. Otherwise, let's go slow, engage the neighbor, and forget about the United States.
Raphael, if I could get this last question here real quick, if I could just get your predictions on if the deal comes to fruition, what's the timeline that we're looking at? And then also, what's the timeline before the U.S. reneges on it, too?
Yes, that is, that is really a kind, let's try to imagine the future. It is not my job, but I will not go away from the question. First of all, I tell you, it's not my job. I don't see the future. I'm more an historian, actually. But I think I'm positive in the very coming months. By summer, we might have a deal. And we might have the first steps toward implementing or going back concretely on the JCPOA. This is why we saw the waivers.
Wow. Professor, I really appreciate this conversation. You're extremely good.
It's my pleasure, really. You have a wonderful program, wonderful show. It's always a privilege to be with you and your listeners.
Thank you. I appreciate it. The voice that you guys are listening to is Professor Raphael Morello. He's a geopolitical analyst and assistant professor at the Faculty of Persian Literature and Foreign Languages, Amela Tabaida University, Tehran, and an invited lecturer at the Master's Program in Geopolitics and Global Security at Sapienza University of Rome. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. We'll be back in a moment.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I'm your ever vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the right corner, I'm the sweet siren song luring listeners to the perilous rocks of truth, your political analyst, Austin Pelly.
Perilous rocks of truth indeed. That means you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly.
How'd I do?
Sweet siren song, perilous rocks of truth. I love that.
It was kind of like I keep getting requests for more Greek mythology, so okay. I mean, that was my geek phase when I was growing up. So I'm gonna keep going for it. And it was kind of like my geeky mythological way of, red pill, blue pill.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah. Love it.
But yeah, for those of you just tuning in, we had a great first hour talking about Iran and the nuclear negotiations. Definitely go back and listen to it if you haven't after the show, of course. And you're hearing Jamarl. You're not seeing him. I know it's shocking for me, too. I have to look at my engineers instead of Jamarl's face. And while they are beautiful, they are different. But don't worry, he should be back tomorrow. He's doing fine. He's joining us remotely. So he truly is indefatigable. You can't sit him out of the show. But let's move on to COVID news here. Yesterday in the United States, there were 253,782 new COVID cases reported, along with 2,598 deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 253,800 cases per day, a decrease of 62% from the average 2 weeks ago. I believe yesterday was 57%. So its ratio is going in the good direction. So 64% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 76% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 76,767,122 people across the United States and killed 904,144 people. Officials in New Jersey, Connecticut, Delaware, California, and Oregon said on Monday they will lift indoor mask mandates for schools and other public places in coming weeks, seeking a return to normalcy as soaring COVID-19 infections fueled by the Omicron variant abate. The changes signal a growing inclination by political leaders in those states, all led by Democrats, to take pandemic-wary residents off an emergency footing and shift towards policies that treat the virus as part of everyday life. Compulsory face coverings have proven especially fraught and politically heated in public education. 4 of the states announcing actions on Monday, California being the exception. They set hard deadlines for ending mask mandates in schools. In national news, Biden's top science advisor, Eric Lander, resigned Monday following reports of bullying and disrespect to subordinate staff. The resignation comes after insistence from the White House that Lander would remain in his position while receiving some correction and training to improve. In a statement, Lander wrote, quote, "I am devastated that I caused hurt to past and present colleagues by the way in which I have spoken to them," end quote. Lander's departure constitutes the highest profile departure for the Biden team to date. Former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is seriously considering a political comeback as early as this year, 2 sources close to his inner circle told media, adding to a series of recent reports hinting at the Democrats' desire to resurrect his career after resigning in disgrace last summer. Cuomo, 64, faced impeachment and removal from office when he stepped down in August 2021 following a series of allegations of sexual harassment, which were detailed in a report by the state attorney general, and growing criticism over his handling of the pandemic, including his administration's release of misleading information about the death toll in nursing homes. The former governor expressed regret for resigning over the sexual harassment allegations against him and defiantly claimed that he has been vindicated by the court of public opinion. In a 5-4 ruling, the Supreme Court put on hold a lower court's decision to redraw new congressional districts in Alabama before 2022 to increase black voting power. The current lines give Republicans a good chance of holding on to 6 of the 7 seats in the House of Representatives. In international news, diplomatic efforts to defuse the tensions around Ukraine continue today, with French President Emmanuel Macron arriving in Kiev the day after hours of talks with the Russian leader in Moscow. yielded no apparent breakthroughs. Macron met with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky as fears of a possible Russian invasion mount. Moscow has amassed over 100,000 troops near Ukraine's border, but insists it has no plans to attack Ukraine. Macron told reporters that the talks with Putin allowed him to ensure that, quote, there's no degradation and no further escalation, end quote. So in other words, nothing. For Russia's part, the Kremlin denied that Vladimir Putin had promised Macron that Russia would stage no further maneuvers near Ukraine for now, pouring cold water on a tentative French assertion of diplomatic progress. I guess we kind of alluded to that yesterday when we were talking about these talks that seems like it would just not really do much. It's kind of a PR stunt for Macron, even though we were hoping it to be a little better. Go ahead.
Yeah, we were hoping something came of it. Yeah, we were hoping something came of it. I mean, from my take, Angela Merkel was the face of Europe for 16, 17 years. I mean, she was Europe. And she was this kind of steady, they used to say Obama was a steady hand on the tiller, as they called it. Well, that was her. And so with her stepping down, there's this kind of vacuum in regards to who's going to take that prominent step. Well, it seems that Macron wants to take that step. Yeah. He wants to kind of supplant her. What's his name? Schultz is that? I'm sorry. Yeah, Olaf. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Olaf is not necessarily in a position yet where he's, a dominant personality. If anything, he's been pretty muted on the whole thing. And so Macron seems like he's trying to take that step. I mean, it did seem like the conversation went for 4 hours, if I'm not mistaken, 4 or 6 hours. So they definitely had a talk. And I guess the question becomes, okay, what came of it? I don't know. It sounded a little bit more optimistic when I was reading through it yesterday and this morning. But we'll see. I mean, they're going to have future conversations. Apparently, Macron is going to Ukraine, and he's going to talk to Zelensky. And so, yeah, we'll see what comes out of it. But it seems like they're making more progress with Europe than the United States.
If he can usher in the peace talks, I'm all for it. I don't care who's going to bring it to the table. But if there's de-escalation and peace talks, then cool. We don't need
1,000% agree with
a war. Yeah. In Ontario, judge granted a 10-day injunction on Monday that forbids truckers parked on city streets in downtown Ottawa from constantly honking their horns. Quote, tooting a horn is not an expression of any great thought. I am aware of. Ontario Superior, end quote. Ontario Superior Court Justice Hugh McLean said during court proceedings, McLean said he had heard sufficient evidence that the incessant honking from the convoy in protest of government vaccine mandates is impinging on Ottawan residents' right for quiet, which he said trumpeted the truckers' rights to protest. Trumped. Sorry for butchering that one, but I mean, I kind of understand it at this point. It's been 10 days. If you want to put out a no honking past 10 p.m., people got kids. People need to get up for work. If there were trucks honking outside and I was being asked to wake up at 5:30 and do a radio show, I would be a little upset.
You got some feelings about that. Yeah. I can't blame them at all. I mean, it's been 10 days.
Yeah.
And so basically these guys were laying on the horn for all of these days. Or they might even say, honk if you, whatever. In which case, all throughout the course of the day, you basically have honking. Yeah. And these are trucks. Mm-hmm. So it's not like, it's obnoxious. So yeah, I agree with the judge on this one.
I get it. And they gave him 10 days of free reign. Yeah,
they gave him 10 days.
For sure.
That's right.
Yeah. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson sang Gloria Gaynor's hit song, I Will Survive, according to his new communications director before discussing his appointment to try to reset his premiership after a series of political scandals. The pair reportedly launched into a rendition of the song after he asked the Prime Minister if he could survive. Johnson's premiership is in crisis amid anger over a series of alcohol-fueled events held at his Downing Street office and residence during coronavirus lockdowns, which followed other missteps. I can just imagine the two sitting down having a genuine conversation like, hey, man, your premiership is on the line. And he's just going, will I survive? And the other person goes, at first I was afraid. I was petrified. And then they just musical.
And then they're singing it with a British accent.
Oh, boy.
Man, that's awesome.
Not even going to try that. I'm not even going to, but
That's awesome.
we got other headlines. So Olaf Scholz, as we alluded to, of Germany, met with President Biden yesterday to coordinate and get on the same page about the two countries' reactions if Russia invades Ukraine. Joe Biden, specifically Joe Biden, assured the public that if there is an invasion, then Germany will shut off the controversial pipeline Nord Stream 2. Scholz took a slightly more worried approach, but the two are apparently on the same page. This comes as German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock was scheduled to arrive in Kiev today, but that meeting has been canceled by the Ukrainians, touting German refusal to send weapons and give guarantees of shutting down Nord Stream 2. That, of course, is according to CNN and our American media. So, I mean, when we get someone on tomorrow, we'll see how actually accurate that is. In tech news, singer-songwriter Neil Young has asked employees of Spotify to quit their jobs while urging people to withdraw their money from big American banks in protest over coronavirus misinformation and climate change. Meanwhile, social media platform Rumble has offered Joe Rogan the same $100 million deal to bring his popular podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, to its video platform amid controversy surrounding his show on Spotify. Rumble CEO Chris Pavlovsky wrote in an open letter on Monday that he stands with Rogan, who is facing blowback for COVID-19 vaccine misinformation on his show and his past use of racial slurs. Former President Donald Trump also threw his hat into the ring, asserting, quote, Joe Rogan is an interesting and popular guy, but he's got to stop apologizing to the fake news and radical left maniatic and lunatics. That's exactly how he said it, end quote. And then today in holiday news, today is Extraterrestrial Culture Day. Oh, that's why you're not in today, Jamarl. And today is also National Kite Flying Day. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly.
Extraterrestrial Culture Day. I have no idea what that is.
Well, actually, I don't even know exactly.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, I mean, you celebrate the culture of extraterrestrials, so, but do we have a lock on what that is?
Yeah, right. It's like, which one? How many are there? And like, how exotic are you supposed to go with this? I don't know, man. That's an awesome one. I kind of want to know the origin of that one.
Sure. I'm sure Jack's looking at it right now then.
Yeah, we're 100 years too early for that.
Yeah. I did want to bring up something that I got an alert on my phone. It's rather breaking. Pope Benedict the 16th, he's in the German investigation for possibly moving around bishops in Munich during, I believe it was 1945 to 2019. At some point during that, when he was the archbishop between 77 and 82, possibly moving around abusive priests within the Catholic Church. So far, he has asked for pardoning for abuse, but he has not admitted to any wrongdoing. So what he said, let's see if I can find the exact quote. I have had great responsibilities in the Catholic Church. All the greater is my pain for the abuses and the errors that occurred in those different places during the time of my mandate. And he said he wants forgiveness for any grievous faults in his handling of clergy sex abuse cases, but admitted no personal or specific wrongdoing. So that's our update there. How does that make you feel?
That's interesting. I mean, he's in one sense, I'm not going to own up to wrongdoing. By the same sense, I need a pardon, which invariably emits guilt on some level.
Yeah, or is it?
I mean, or tell me if I'm wrong.
Or is it the whole, I apologize to anyone that was offended thing? Kind of like a
interesting
half-baked. I'm still maintaining my position and my point, but like, if you need to hear this, here it is.
Interesting. Maybe. Yeah. I mean, on some level, I mean, wow. I mean, because this guy, he's in his 90s, right?
94.
I mean, he's up there in age.
94.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, man, that's a tough one. I mean, I get the feeling, because I think you admitted yourself, it's hard. I would be surprised if he didn't know about what was going on at the time.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he would also be fairly spry. That's 40 years ago? I mean, he'd be still pretty with it at 50, young 50s.
Yeah, so he's not out of it. It's one thing if it was today. And it's dude, at 90 years old, you were overseeing. It's not that. I mean, he was, I'm not going to say at the prime of his career, but definitely at the height of it. So he would have definitely have known. I mean, he doesn't have to own up to wrongdoing. No. Maybe he should own up to wrongdoing on that.
Yes, he should.
The more I think about it.
He should.
Yeah. I mean, that's...
I mean, we'll see what the report comes. Actually, yes, if anyone should get ahead of the scandal, if you're preaching... if you're practicing what you preach, then you should admit it if you're in the wrong, especially as the Pope.
Yes, agreed.
I want to agree. Yes, I want to. But hey, that's the update. I will continue to bring it up as I see it, because as a Catholic, I don't ever want to be accused of trying to hide the story. I think we should 100% investigate it. We should also investigate Joe Biden. But so for Extraterrestrial Culture Day, it's celebrated on the second Tuesday of February and takes place on February 8th this year. The day exists to celebrate and honor all past, present, and future extraterrestrial visitors and ways to enhance relationships among all citizens of the cosmos, known and unknown.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
New Mexico's General Assembly passed this to establish the holiday. Although Extraterrestrial Culture Day specifically originated in New Mexico, today is celebrated in places far from its border. Any person interested in the mysteriousness of the universe and alien life may be seen celebrating the day.
That makes sense now. Because, in Mexico, South America, there is a tradition of, like, sky people and stuff like that. Like, this notion of... they're far more open to it than we are. I mean, there's all sorts of missions, like I think it's called Mission Rama or something to that effect, where these guys are actively trying to make contact. And so, yeah, that makes sense now in that context.
I think I'm now in love with the phrase citizens of the cosmos.
Citizens of the cosmos. Citizens of the universe. I like that one. But yeah, citizens of the cosmos. I like it.
Yeah, I do too. But we got our guest on the line. We'll be coming back with Ted Rall for... a little Cuomo discussion because he always shows up. He always comes back. He always, it's just like a yo-yo. So, we'll be back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly, coming right back after this break.
Fault Lines. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys happen to find yourself in the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Austin and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. And like a bad venereal disease that you just can't get rid of, or for the most part just keeps coming back regardless of how much you inoculate yourself, regardless of what antibiotics you take, it keeps coming back. And here we have one Andrew Cuomo, former Governor Andrew Cuomo, who was basically ran out of office after killing a lot of grandmas with bad policy on COVID, with touching or can't keep his hands to himself, in another sense. But it was the not being able to keep his hands to himself was the thing that basically took him out of office, not the killing of all of those grandmas. But in this very particular situation, Andrew Cuomo is trying to make a comeback To have a conversation about this and other issues that are taking place, we're joined with the one and only Ted Rall. Ted Rall is a political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. Ted, are you going to vote for Cuomo now? He's coming back into New York politics.
Well, why would I be the only one besides him to vote for him?
Are you shocked by this, like this reappraisal of this, return to politics?
I'm shocked. I know politics and everything in culture has become compressed, but I just, I expected this, but like 3 years from now, not now.
Yeah, it's so fast. It's like, a few months turnaround.
Yeah, he needs to go do penance. He needs 40 days in the desert, right? He needs to go out and harder and do some construction on homes for the poor. He needs to pass out biscuits to the homeless. He needs to do something to redeem himself. Look, even, what's his name? Jerry Brown, the former governor of California, he wasn't disgraced or anything, but when he wanted to make his comeback, he went and became mayor of Oakland, and by all accounts rolled up his sleeves and became a very hardworking, serious mayor who was widely respected. Cuomo's got to do something. He's Catholic. He should know better. His religion is all about he needs to do penance.
Yeah, I was so blown away and shocked by this, and the first thing that I was thinking of, well, why did he resign then? Was it just that much pressure? If you're genuinely innocent, was it that much pressure? I think what maybe happened was he goes, Cuomo, he's like, oh man, people are starting to get really worked up about this. I think I might need to step down to save face. And then he's trying to fade into the shadows, right, as much as possible. Then all of a sudden he hears all charges dropped. Oh, okay. I guess we can go back. So, and it's funny that even the reporting on this, it's all about, as Jamarl, you even mentioned, like, he killed all the grandmas. All the reporting, not about the grandmas. It's about the sexual assault allegations that are no more than allegations right now. So it's just very interesting. I'm curious because these are all rumors, right? If he's coming back, if Cuomo's coming back. So, do you think that he will? Is my first question.
Well, to run for AG this year? No, I think he has enough people who are still close to him who are intelligent enough to talk him down, and if that won't happen. The thing is, there's no appetite in this state for the return of Cuomoism, right? Because aside from before he started doing his charming press conferences during COVID, nobody cared about him. Republicans didn't like him because he was a Democrat. And Democrats in this state are progressive for the most part. And progressives didn't like him because he did all sorts of stuff that, basically a Republican might have done. So it's not like Elliot Spitzer. Elliot Spitzer could make a comeback. He could run for governor and win. Now, people miss him. People regret what happened to him. They think it was wrong. They think that we lost something when we lost him. That's not true about Cuomo.
So for Cuomo, people were fine with him leaving. But how did he have that much political clout then if people were that fine with him leaving? Does it make sense? Like, he's been able to stay, he was, going into his fourth term. So he had been in for 3 terms. This would have been his fourth. And he was trying to outdo the record that his dad set. Okay, fair enough. But if people hated him that much, how was he able to create that much political power in New York?
Well, Himmler had political power, and he was reviled within the German hierarchy. He was a thug. He bullied people. Once he got into his after his second term, he started really just leaning on the machinery of power. And I think you have to understand this isn't really a democracy. Like, once you're in, especially in a one-party state like New York, where the Republican Party is just a husk on the state level, you're pretty much in. And then your constituency is not the voters of the state. Your constituency is the state assembly, the state police, all these the Port Authority, all these sort of loci of power that are very different. It's kind of like, it's like in my business. People say, if people like your cartoons, you'll be in the paper. No. I'll be in the paper if the editor likes the cartoon. I have a constituency of 1 per client. And that's exactly how it is for Cuomo. For him, it was about his ability to push the Speaker of the House around, not about how popular he was within the. No one was ever, before the pandemic, ever saying, "Oh my God, we're so lucky to have Governor Andrew Cuomo."
Yeah, I have a lot of family in New York, and just walking around New York, it's funny the visceral hatred they had for him while he was there. I'm wondering though, has Cuomo, because when Cuomo resigned, if I'm remembering the resignation video correctly, he gave a general apology, but he maintained his innocence, if I'm remembering that correctly. So has Cuomo done enough to put this behind him, specifically the sexual harassment claims? And then is this court rulings, because all it says is there wasn't enough evidence. That's technically what was said. That, I mean, if you're taking innocent until proven guilty, then there wasn't enough evidence to convict. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. And if Cuomo's maintaining his innocence, it becomes a he said, she said to the American public. So to the American public, has Cuomo done enough to project genuine innocence?
Well, I think he hasn't convinced them. I think the average voter in New York believes that he's guilty. And I think so, and that could be for a variety of reasons. I mean, I think, first of all, it's like with Cosby, there were a lot of accusers, and once you tip into a certain number of accusers, it's really hard to walk away. I think everyone also realizes that these are inherently he said, she said situations that are hard to prosecute and always will be, always have been. So, and I think it's and I think there's sort of the smell test. Does Cuomo seem like the kind of guy who might have done the thing that he was accused of doing? Like, sure,
absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if he really is innocent. I don't know. And it's all just a bunch of really mean women who are lying about it. That's possible. I mean, I'm not being sarcastic here. That's entirely possible. But it's not is it likely? Probably not.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I mean, this is one of those things where, like they said, the claims were credible. They just didn't necessarily have enough evidence to bring it through court. But that doesn't necessarily affect how people view him, meaning whether the legalities of it can be declared through court or not is secondary to the point of how people may perceive him as being guilty, even if you couldn't necessarily get him as guilty. And I guess he looked at that, though, as if there is no specific legal reason that I've been convicted of anything, then I'm going to run again. I want my time back in the sun. I mean, maybe that's just as bare bones as he looks at it. For whatever reason, he just can't give up the politics, or he can't give up this kind of public persona. And I even think there may be this aspect of how he left, like, meaning he can't let it go because he basically felt that he was disadvantaged in the way that he was put out of office. Like, maybe he just can't leave it because of that. I don't know. I don't necessarily know what's in Cuomo's head on this, but it just seems way too soon. I agree with you on this.
Oh, yeah.
This is something where maybe after 5 years, okay, fair enough, Cuomo's making a comeback. People forgot about it. But that's been like 3 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
This is extreme. This is so recent. I just don't see it.
Right,
Ted,
yeah.
one more thing I wanted to bounce to. Had to do with Joe Biden. So right here.
Actually, Biden, Jamal, can I cut in real quick on this before we move over to Biden?
Absolutely.
I'm curious to know if I know that it's a leap to say that Cuomo would run, and if he would run, he would get his position back. But if we're to take that, I see this whole controversy of who made their career from Cuomo leaving. Letitia James. So if Cuomo is reinstated, or if he runs, can she use that as another political football to either further her career, to keep him out of office, or once he's in office to investigation 2.0, or is her work done and she would leave it at that?
Well, if the gods will something very as strange as Cuomo returning to Albany, if I were Letitia James, I'd hire a food taster. She'd be in a perilous situation. And, I don't think there's any world in which that's going to happen. And the rumor here is that actually he was thinking of running for AG against Letitia rather than for his old back, which doesn't seem to make much sense. Look, the thing, the advantage that he has is that, the former lieutenant governor, Kathy Hochul, is kind of a nothing in this state. Nobody even really cares about her. She's the first woman governor, but the way she ascended isn't makes it sort of an asterisk. And she's an upstate person. She's from Buffalo. All the power in this state is in New York City, and that's where the population is. And people here don't know her or care about her or like her. So, except for the fact that hey, she's a woman, so that's cool. So I think he could credibly. I mean, I don't know. He would have to make. It would have to be a world of spin for him to return to that position. As for James, I think James's path is pretty clear. I think she's angling for perhaps a 2028 Democratic presidential primary run, that kind of thing.
Let me ask you this. Why do you think she pulled out of that? Like, do you think it was a situation, meaning she was going to run for governor, and then all of a sudden she stepped back and said, okay, I'm not going to run for governor? Do you think it was too shallow, meaning it was too close, it was too on the nose? You take out the governor, and then you immediately run for governor. Was it a public perception thing? I'm curious. What was the talk in New York around that? I mean, because I thought her chances were quite good. I mean, granted, I don't live in New York, so me saying I think her chances are quite good doesn't mean anything. But she definitely had the name recognition, and she definitely had a certain amount of gravitas associated with her willingness to go after Trump and her willingness to go after Cuomo. So in a weird way, she seemed almost above it, despite the fact that it was pretty, decent politics for her to basically get rid of governor and then go for the governor's position.
But I would like to think of it as if I saw the attorney general do this investigation and then immediately ran for the position that she just deposed someone from, then it's saying like, okay, how legitimate was that investigation? But exactly. Ted, is there a different story?
Yeah.
No, look, I agree. I think that's exactly the reason that she thought better of it. It wasn't really a smart move to announce in the first place and then get candidates' remorse and back out. But
exactly,
it was still kind of like the best thing she could do. I think that was wise. I mean, she shouldn't have been so quick to the draw. It looked like really grotesquely careerist, and I think she realized that the New Yorkers were not going to go for that.
I want to move a little bit over into Joe Biden's workers, what is it called? A worker task force. Now, if you remember, when Biden was running for office, he kept saying the PRO Act. He backed unions. I'm a union guy. Joe Biden's a union guy. And the thing that came up was the PRO Act. The PRO Act was a bill specifically to increase unionization across the United States and protect those unions from companies that were basically trying to prevent unionization efforts. Well, Biden said he was backing this, and then all of a sudden he gets in office, just like the $15 an hour minimum wage, just like the legalization of marijuana, it goes to the wayside. And instead of backing it, he says, I'm going to push for a worker task force. Well, the workers task force came out and it gave, I think it was like 30 different provisions or 30 different ideas or recommendations. But let's be clear, though. This is just optics, right, Ted? I mean, if you wanted to push for unions, you push for the PRO Act. If you want to get credit for it without actually doing anything, you do what he's doing now. Or am I being too hard on Joe Biden on this?
I never think it's possible to be too hard on the president of the United States, and I think you're not being too hard on him here. Look, the PRO Act is, to me, even just barely a start, really. I mean, Taft-Hartley Act should be repealed. There's no reason that public service employees shouldn't be allowed to strike. That's just, teachers should be allowed to strike. In the last 2 years have certainly shown that. If you can't strike, if you can't withhold your labor, what are you? You're a wage slave. You're not a free American. And it's the same thing is true about how like for example Truman declared the coal miners to be an essential service, even though they weren't public service workers. So they weren't allowed, the mine workers weren't allowed to strike. That's all Taft-Hartley Act crap, and it should be repealed immediately. If you're pro-union, then you've got to make it easy. You have to make it easy for people to unionize. They should be able to sign a card, have a simple vote. There shouldn't the boss shouldn't be allowed to repeatedly propagandize the workers in these locked sessions to tell you why unions are evil and why it's going to ruin this beautiful relationship you have with your boss. I'm always like, what kind of drugs do they think we are taking?
Right.
So there's a reason why, what is it, 6% of workers are represented by a union. When I was a kid, it was 40. Unions have essentially been abolished from a bunch of episodes like the air traffic controllers union that was busted under Reagan. Just all these episodes that have been forgotten. And, there's a lot, and it's funny, in my profession, we had a union in World War II. Cartoonists had a union. It's all, all that stuff's out the window now, but I think a lot of Americans would love to join a union. I'm one of them.
Mm-hmm. So, Ted, if Biden were to actually push for this and make actual physical moves on actually getting Americans who want to unionize the ability to do that, what would it mean for the Democratic Party, and what would it mean for the Biden presidency themselves? Because as we were talking about in the headlines, there were talks about political staffers or politicians' staffers wanting to unionize, and especially with the headline of Eric Lander resigning yesterday because of disrespect and bullying to subordinate staff. If that's a personal affront, sure, but that could also be like professional bullying and pushing them around. So what would that mean in a political sense, but also for the greater Democratic Party?
Well, it's a political/economic problem for the Democratic Party because beginning in the 1970s, they moved away from the small contributor to the big contributor, a.k.a. corporate donor model. So Democrats are getting most of their money from big companies that naturally oppose unions for obvious reasons, since, payroll is typically about 2/3 of the operating expenses of any corporation. So they're trying to keep those costs down. So they're going to piss off their big corporate donors if they, do anything to encourage unionization. So I think the Capitol Hill thing is, staffer thing is it has yet to be seen, right? We'll see if that has any kind of effect. It's symbolically interesting, but I think there's kind of like more meat in like what's going on with the grad students at various universities, like Columbia University near where I live, who have been picketing and getting a lot. I've noted, I see them. I live near Columbia, and I see taxi drivers and bus drivers honking support at them. That's very interesting because these are white-collar intellectual workers, intellect workers, mind workers, and I think that really is the future.
Have they gotten any credences to their demands?
Quite a bit. Even the Wall Street Journal, which has a conservative editorial page for which I work sometimes, has editorialized that they have real legitimate grievances. They work at basically effectively below minimum wage in this state. They're typically getting $12, $13, $14 an hour the way it's all worked out. They work long hours. And, the AFL-CIO has been focused on sort of going after the shrinking blue-collar base of potential union members and, new immigrants and stuff. But, they should also definitely be looking at the people who, the cube workers, the coders, people who are theoretically considered white-collar because, they do stuff that doesn't involve, getting dirty at the end of the day. But, it's still work, and it's still the same fundamental, boss-worker relationship.
Right. But does that mean that, I have to ask the question, does that mean that only the white or the elites, the highly educated who make a stint can, I guess, get their grievances heard and unionize? Or is it open to all? It sounds like the more high educated you are, well, if a highly educated person makes a big issue and they picket fence and all that, then we have to listen to them.
Well, there is an element of classism there, but what someone like me would like to see is worker solidarity, where which is something closer to what you see in France. Like, if in France the train conductors go on strike, well, so do the postal workers, and so do the teachers, and the college professors, and the students, and so on. They all recognize they're all in it together. That's how class consciousness works in other countries like Europe. So I think it's true. The other thing, you have to go where the numbers are. This country is deindustrializing at an amazingly quick pace, if you go after industrial workers, you're just not going to have a union left after a while. I mean, these knowledge jobs, it's not the future, it's the present.
That's a really good point. I mean, we all, especially on the left, we often decry this kind of implosion of the unions. And do you think that's one of the key reasons as to why? That mainly many of these manufacturing jobs basically have gone belly up. I mean, I remember in Richmond, you'd have factories that were basically just empty. I mean, there were so many of them, in fact, they were converting them to hotels or to apartments because, the businesses that were there at one point were no longer there. So do you think that the unionization part of the collapse had to do with this kind of hollowing out of the industrial base of the United States to a point where many of those workers basically are no longer doing the jobs? And so I hope that makes sense. So it's like, instead of having a situation where workers are being replaced, et cetera, well, those jobs just aren't there anymore. And when those jobs left, so did the unions within that context. Do you think that's the case?
I think it's sort of a mixed bag. I mean, you can't go on strike to keep your job. And I think conservatives would argue, and I think with some justification, that high union wages were a big driving force to encourage globalization, right? And to encourage manufacturers to move their factories overseas, because it was like, well, why should I pay, some guy to put doors on a refrigerator $35 an hour when I can have someone in Indonesia do it for $1? But I think where the unions enter into it is, they could have, when unions were powerful, when the AFL-CIO was a massive force in Washington, they could have leaned on Congress and on the president to counteract the sort of actively deindustrialization policies that went through over the last 30, 40, 50 years. So, NAFTA, for example, was sort of sitting there as a proposal starting in the 1960s, but it didn't go through until the 90s under Bill Clinton. That's, I think, because union lobbyists were preventing that from happening. The WTO, I think, there's more the protectionist forces would have been there, had more support. There's been union lobbying money there to make it happen.
Ted, do you think that anything will come from these promises and the task force that Biden touted again, the White House task force on worker organization and empowerment? Do you think that it will actually have a legitimate impact, or is this kind of just, I mean, I know we talked about the symbolism, and I'm not asking that specifically. Is this the start of actual actions or not?
Well, it's an election year that the Democrats are about to lose. Okay, so really pretty much, no matter how committed Biden is to anything that comes out of this task force, it ain't going to happen. And that said, if it's really a priority at this point for this White House, it has to happen through executive order, and it's obviously not a priority. You wouldn't be able to get anything like that past a Joe Manchin, who is definitely, or Kirsten Sinema. They are not pro-union. So this is something the White House would just have to do unilaterally, and knowing that the next Republican president will just reverse it. It's not a serious gambit, and it kind of doesn't matter. It's one of those things where 2 wrongs equals 0, because nothing was going to happen anyway.
Really good point. Was it 2 wrongs equals 0 because nothing was going to happen anyway? Oh, man, I agree with you. That's still unfortunate. Ted, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it. I always enjoy coming on to the show and talking with us. The voice that you guys are listening to is Ted Rall. He's a political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. You can follow Ted on Twitter at Ted Rall and read his cartoons and articles at rall.com. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. We'll be back taking your calls. The number is 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo. and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. And we are taking your phone calls. The number is 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. And apparently we have a report coming out. So this is the Supreme Court dismisses Chesapeake parents' lawsuit over Youngkin's mask mandate ban. And let me see. The Virginia Supreme Court on Monday ruled against a group of Chesapeake parents fighting Governor Glenn Youngkin's ban on mask mandates in school. The court ruled that the parent group had no grounds for its suit because it challenged Youngkin's executive order issued on his first day in office seeking a writ of mandamus, basically forcing an official to fulfill their official duties or correct an abuse of discretion. So basically, they're saying this is not an abuse of power. The court said the writ of prohibition didn't apply because it generally applies to courts, and that the writ of mandamus didn't apply because the parents hadn't shown a clear and unequivocal duty that Youngkin hadn't fulfilled. So they basically was trying to say that Youngkin wasn't fulfilling his duties because he put in a mask ban or removed the mask mandate. The court's point is, well, that's not a duty of his. If the other person can put it on, somebody else can take it off. It's just an executive order, and it's the power of Youngkin. He's not necessarily doing anything nefarious, nor is he doing anything that he's not supposed to do.
He's also not doing anything that's like out of the ordinary for his position.
Right. And that was kind of the point the judge is making. It's like, dude, what are you talking about? You may disagree with it, but he's not doing anything wrong per se.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've agreed on this, that we agree with that decision. And I mean, you can't have it both ways. I mean, that's saying that he's not performing his duty of forcing all schools, all students to wear masks. So his duty is to force all students to wear masks?
Right. Yeah. And that's not his job.
I don't subscribe to that.
That's clearly not his duty. Yeah.
I don't subscribe to that.
One way or the other.
Also, I'm seeing from NBC News, at least this is how they're reporting it, that Ukraine is preparing guerrilla warfare tactics. By training in guerrilla warfare, they're saying that 50.2% of Ukrainians are willing to resist against a Russian invasion, and the military is all aware that they couldn't take Russia on head-to-head, so they would be training, they would implement some guerrilla tactics, which begs the question, who's training them? Ukrainian officials or good old Americans?
It's probably both. I mean, honestly, if you think about it, we've had reports that the CIA was talking about training for guerrilla fighting. We've had this other talk where apparently in the United States, they were training for potential guerrilla combat. And we've sent all sorts of people over there, like for trainers and stuff like that. So I would imagine that some of the responsibilities or duties that those guys are doing is specifically that. In case we lose a war, we need to, have people in that country to create all sorts of chaos and everything else in order to fight on after the fact.
Right, yes. And to our listeners, we are taking your calls, 202-521-1320. But Jamarl, I did call it, I wanted to say, and I know that it's not 100% certain, but I did call that, hey, what if this 4,000 troop deployment that we just sent over to Europe is also hiding a couple dozen, couple hundred guerrilla warfare professionals, I guess if you could say that, or tactic professionals. And now this report of Ukrainians, let's say, training, that might be a little too strong, in guerrilla warfare tactics. I mean, is that a coincidence? And
no, I don't think that's a
if we had Kyriakou,
I think it's.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, no, I don't think it's coincidence. Nor do I think it's far-fetched. I mean, if you were Ukraine right now, you're not going to win that conflict, and you're not going to win it. And so, trying to have this kind of squaring off where two sides are. That's not really going to work. Your army is going to get crushed in short order. And so the only thing you do have at that point is kind of like behind-the-scene tactics or guerrilla tactics, this kind of asymmetric warfare, because you can't necessarily have it on even kill. So no, you're right. I mean, the conversations and the practice and the training and everything else, it was probably for that very specific eventuality.
And if we have Kiriako's take on here, I mean, I had asked, like, hey, did this leak out of North Carolina that the U.S. Army was practicing these tactics? Was that on purpose? And he said, absolutely. So if we had this take on, oh, well, Ukraine, it's now, we're done with it in the States. We're moving over to Ukraine. I would have to believe that the news gets wind of it on purpose. So Russia is reminded of, hey, if you invade here, you're gonna win, but we're gonna take down as many of you as we can, and it will not be easy, and it will be bloody.
I mean, the rub is, God, man, this is just, there is no good outcome for this. That's what's so aggravating about this. Like, A, the issue didn't have to come about. That's the first point. B, on top of that, any notion of good faith negotiation, like just acknowledging, yes, Russia has security concerns, just like the United States has security concerns, or just like France, meaning all nations have things that bother those nations. And any of those nations that are sovereign countries, especially if they have some level of understanding of their own power and clout, they're going to take serious qualms with things that are undermining their security. Now, an honest actor can acknowledge that, and an honest actor can admit that, okay, fair enough, Russia's going to have their own security concerns just like any country would. Now, the catch is, what do you do with that? And instead of us kind of dealing with that honestly and earnestly, we've taken on just the politics of it all. There is no good outcome to this, meaning any time this turns kinetic, it's bad for everybody. You're talking about gas going through the roof. You're talking about Europe basically freezing, depending upon what Europe ended up doing. You're talking about bringing the world to the brink of a world war. Like, none of this stuff is good. And yet, here we are, still having this kind of brinksmanship and still having this conversation on stuff that can basically end the world.
Hopefully, Emmanuel Gandhi Macron can usher in a new era of peace between everyone. We do have Brave calling in. Brave from Atlanta. You're on the line, man. What's on your mind?
Hey, good morning, guys. I guess I'd be Captain Obvious, but I think we probably have some false flags to look forward to on our side to spur something or being done by our side, or maybe by, I guess, the guerrilla warfare contractors is what I'm going to refer to them as, or operatives, so that they can get something spurred off, because it's clear that we want this to be done and no one else seems to want it. So, and they seem to be priming the media up pretty heavy. So I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Also,
that's the wild part. Europe doesn't seem to be in on this. I mean, like, even when Biden was talking to Olaf Scholz, well, Biden was being pretty boisterous. Olaf wasn't. I mean, he was being pretty cagey about this notion of Nord Stream 2 and everything else. I mean, the real reality of it is the United States is not over there, and their concerns are not our concerns. And so Europe has all sorts of concerns that the United States just doesn't have to fundamentally deal with. And so it's pretty rich that the U.S. is like, yeah, we're going to be boisterous and all of us on the same page. And Europe is like, not so much, bro.
Yeah.
Not so much.
Yeah, and so it's easy for America to do that while we're so far away. But I mean, I would also venture to guess that Britain in the UK would be way more willing to go along with the guerrilla warfare tactics and demonization of Russia. So, which are also probably one of the further parts from Europe, between Europe and Russia. So I get that. But Brave, you had another point?
No, I was just going to say, based off what you guys were just saying, do you think it's possible that maybe I'm restating the same question, I don't know. Do you think it's possible that we could see these guys get into some antics? Because usually the guerrilla war
flags.
After the,
I mean, it's possible, yeah. I mean, in the situation where we're in now, where both sides are basically throwing, aspersions back and forth. Like, the U.S. is accusing Russia of a false flag, and then Russia at one point accused, saying Ukraine may be able to provoke a false flag or something to that effect and bring everybody into the war. I mean, honestly, everything is up for grabs at this point. And the sad part is, because of the confusion and because both sides are basically throwing propaganda back at each other and both sides are making their points and everything else, what's true is unknown. You know what I mean? Like something could basically pop off and the reality of what's popping off may be unclear all the way through, with one side casting it as one thing and the other side framing it as something else. I mean, this is not a good position to be in by any stretch of the imagination.
Do I see the U.S. possibly starting a false flag? Regrettably, yes. I see it more so the U.S. than any other country, which is scary because, I mean, we're playing with other people's lives because we're not going to commit troops. It's a sad reality, and we'll see, and I hope not. And also the tough part is we can speculate all we want, but if the U.S. does it, we're not going to know it's a false flag for a long time.
Exactly.
So we're just going to take it as Russia invades.
Yeah, and that's the saddest part. Because the media is not going to report it as a false flag. The media is just going to say, well, Russia did so-and-so. It's exactly the net price thing again, right? Or even the sake thing. It's like, well, where's your evidence? Well, I just told you.
Yeah.
What do you mean you just told me? That's not evidence. It's going to be that. And the only difference is the media is just going to accept it. I mean, the most interesting aspect of that is that Ned Price was basically shocked that the person was asking him for evidence. And you have to ask yourself, well, why is he shocked that somebody was asking for evidence? He's shocked because he typically doesn't have to give it. Like, you know, basically, I've said it, and that's the news.
Yeah,
will. Under normal circumstances, they run with it.
Yeah, we will see how the situation unfolds. Brave, thank you for the call. Always looking forward to it. And I was surprised you didn't call in about the mask mandate lift from New Jersey, Connecticut, all that, or even the Yunkin thing. But, you know, look forward to your call nonetheless. Thank you, Brave. Joe, now we got Joe calling in from Arizona. Joe, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Well, first of all, shout out to you, Austin. I think you are doing a phenomenal job.
Thank you.
In here. And and then Jamarl, you dude, man, I want you to make more videos on your YouTube channel. I miss so much the content that you do. That's how I found where you're at right now is following you around, Jamarl.
Thanks, man. And I will be coming back. I needed a break, like I think it was in August. I was pretty ill. And so I took time off in order to kind of just let everything go back to normal. And I moved into a new place. And so I made sure I had a studio downstairs and everything else. So yeah, you're going to start seeing me back in videos and everything else once I get the studio set up.
Oh, dude, that is good news. Yeah, you know, hey, I was listening to one of your interviews with Scott Ritter, and man, I was kind of blown away. I heard that that Russia has 120,000 troops or something was reported by, you know, air quotes, the media. And I thought I could swear he said that they only had like 60,000 troops, and I was just like stunned by that number. Did I hear it wrong? Or can you guys get?
No, you didn't hear it wrong. So Russia has, I think it was 100 and something thousand near the border. And I think it's maybe, like 100 kilometers, like 100, 200 kilometers.
About 130 miles to the closest border crossing in Ukraine. But that doesn't mean that would be the route that they would take, because the closest border crossing might be over a mountain or through a river or something like that. But yeah, about 130 miles to Ukrainian territory.
Yeah, so it's, you know, they keep saying border. I don't consider 130 miles at the border, but whatever. From the standpoint of Ukraine, though, Ukraine is like half of its entire military, though, like basically waiting, you know, sitting near the Donbass. And so it's like, well, yeah, Russia's in this kind of defensive position in regards to the number of troops and what those troops have stationed in place. But no, Ritter was right. Ritter wasn't mistaken on that.
Yeah, Joe. Joe, that's fine. Thank you for the call. Really appreciate the praise, man. You know, it's not easy. First day alone here in the studio for me while coming on. So I do appreciate it. And thank you for the call. We're going to close it here for this hour, but don't go anywhere. We got another hour coming up. You're listening to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. I'm Austin Pelly with Jamarl Thomas. We'll be right back after the break.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, fixated between the ever-expanding rift on our collective ideology. I'm your political analyst fighting for the right, Austin Pelly.
And in the left corner, I am your indefatigable, your ever-vigilant, your burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
That means that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. All right, good show so far. Only 60 minutes left, so hurry up and listen, I believe, is Jerry, I believe. Correct me.
Hurry up and listen.
That's what I believe Jerry says every time we get to the last hour, so correct me in the comment section. But yeah, if you're looking for a little bit of active engagement, follow us on YouTube. You can also check out Jamarl's channel on YouTube with his chat section. Get a little bit of back and forth between the community there and even sometimes the hosts we pop in every once in a while. But for now, we can move over to our headline starting in COVID news. Yesterday in the United States, there were 253,782 new COVID cases reported, along with 2,598 deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 253,800 cases per day, a decrease of 62% from the average 2 weeks ago. 64% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 76% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 76,767,122 people across the United States and killed 904,144 people. Officials in New Jersey, Connecticut, Delaware, California, and Oregon said on Monday they will lift indoor mask mandates for schools and other public places in coming weeks, seeking a return to quote-unquote normalcy as soaring COVID-19 infections fueled by the Omicron variant abate. The changes signal a growing inclination by political leaders in those states, all led by Democrats, to take pandemic-weary residents off an emergency footing and shift toward policies that treat the virus as part of everyday life. Compulsory face coverings have proven especially fraught and politically heated in public education. 4 of the states announcing action on Monday, California being the exemption, set hard deadlines for ending mask mandates in schools. In national news, Biden's top science advisor, Eric Lander, resigned Monday following reports of bullying and disrespect to subordinate staff. The resignation comes after insistence from the White House that Lander would remain in his position while receiving some correction and training to improve. In a statement, Lander wrote, quote, "I am devastated that I caused hurt to past and present colleagues by the way in which I have spoken to them," end quote. Lander's departure constitutes the highest profile departure for the Biden team to date. Jamarl, I want to hit that again because I am itching to put on the conspiratorial hat on this one. In other national news, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is seriously considering a political comeback as early as this year. 2 sources close to his inner circle told media, adding to a series of recent reports hinting at the Democrats' desire to resurrect his career after resigning in disgrace last summer. Cuomo, 64, faced impeachment and removal from office when he stepped down in August 2021, following a series of allegations of sexual harassment, which were detailed in a report by the state attorney general, and growing criticism over his handling of the pandemic, including his administration's release of misleading information about the death tolls in nursing homes. The former governor expressed regret for resigning over the sexual harassment allegations against him and defiantly claimed that he's been vindicated by the court of public opinion. In a 5-4 ruling, the Supreme Court put a hold on a lower court's decision to redraw new congressional districts in Alabama before 2022 to increase black voting power. The current lines give Republicans a good chance of holding on to 6 of the 7 seats in the House of Representatives. In international news, diplomatic efforts to defuse the tensions around Ukraine continued today, with French President Emmanuel Macron arriving in Kiev the day after hours of talks with Russian leader in Moscow, which yielded no apparent breakthroughs. Macron met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as fears of a possible Russian invasion mount. Moscow has massed over 100,000 troops near Ukraine's border, but insists it has no plans to attack Ukraine. Macron told reporters that the talks with Putin allowed him to ensure that, quote, "there's no degradation and no further escalation," end quote. For Russia's part, the Kremlin denied that Vladimir Putin had promised Macron that Russia would stage no further maneuvers near Ukraine for now, pouring cold water on a tentative French assertion of diplomatic progress. An Ontario judge granted a 10-day injunction on Monday that forbids truckers parked on city streets in downtown Ottawa from constantly honking their horns. Quote, tooting a horn is not an expression of any great thought I am aware of, end quote. Ontario Superior Court Justice Hugh McLean said during court proceedings, he said he had suffered sufficient evidence, or he had heard sufficient evidence that the incessant honking from the convoy in protest of government vaccine mandates is impinging on Ottawan residents' right for quiet, which he said trumped the truckers' right to protest. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson sang Gloria Gaynor's hit song I Will Survive, according to his new communications director, before discussing his appointment to try to reset his premiership after a series of political scandals. The pair reportedly launched into a rendition of the song after he asked the Prime Minister if he could survive. Johnson's premiership is in crisis amid anger over a series of alcohol-fueled events held at Downing Street office and residence during coronavirus lockdowns, which followed other missteps. Olaf Scholz of Germany met with President Biden yesterday to coordinate and get on the same page about the two countries' reactions if Russia invades Ukraine. Joe Biden, specifically Joe Biden, that's the American president, assured the public that if there was an invasion, then Germany will shut off the controversial pipeline Nord Stream 2. Scholz, though, took a slightly more worried approach, but the two are apparently on the same page. A little bit of wishy-washy rhetoric from Scholz. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock was scheduled to arrive in Kiev today, but that meeting has been canceled by the Ukrainians, touting German refusal to send weapons and give guarantees of shutting down Nord Stream 2. That, of course, is being reported by American media, though, so we'll see the true truth. In tech news, singer-songwriter Neil Young has asked employees of Spotify to quit their jobs while urging people to withdraw their money from big American banks in protest over coronavirus misinformation and climate change. Meanwhile, social media platform Rumble has offered Joe Rogan $100 million to bring his popular podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, to its video platform amid controversy surrounding his show on Spotify. Rumble CEO Chris Pavlovsky wrote in an open letter on Monday that he stands with Rogan, who's facing blowback for COVID-19 vaccine misinformation on his show and his past use of racial slurs. Former President Donald Trump also had something to say. He threw his hat in the ring, asserting, quote, Joe Rogan is an interesting and popular guy, but he's got to stop apologizing to the fake news and radical left maniacs and lunatics, end quote. That was actually the clip, if you were listening for that. And in holiday news today is Laugh and Get Rich Day. Interesting. And Propose Day. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. Jack, can I get a thumbs up? Propose as in wedding propose? Gotcha. And it's also Laugh and Get Rich Day. So, I don't know. It seems a little cynical.
Get Rich Day. Yeah. Very cool.
Seems like sitting on your golden throne and laugh at the plebs kind of.
Pretty much. I know, right? Yeah, it's a little patronizing, but that's okay. And Propose Day. Propose Day is interesting. So it's like, what, propose as in marriage? Or
yes.
I guess maybe some other kind of proposal. Maybe it's any kind of proposal. It's like, hey, I propose that you do, I don't know, and today's the day for it, whatever that is.
Well,
that's what I'm going
Propose Day. I mean, it just sounds a little wonky. And then I was thinking, well, what about, okay, Proposition Day? But that means something completely different.
Yeah, proposition, yeah. Yeah, that's very different.
Yeah.
This is very different.
Yeah, but moving on to this story I wanted to hit. Eric Lander resigning. I smell blood in the water. I don't take this at its face value at all, especially because...
So you don't think the guy was being abusive and just a horrible
I think he
person
was. I think it's
job.
way worse than that, because Joe Biden was saying that he takes a hardline stance on bullying and there would be a zero tolerance within his administration. And then this comes out, to which Biden's response is, okay, he's going to stay on. We're going to give him some training and we're going to give him some corrective actions, but he's going to stay on. Then he resigns and Biden finally accepts the resignation. So I'm thinking it was probably worse than just a couple words to a couple people. And Lander's trying to get ahead of that. If that makes any sense.
I see. It was horrendous. He doesn't want it to be exposed. I mean, but him quitting, though, doesn't that bring that stuff to the forefront?
No, it brings...
make it...
I think it kills it right there because, then... I don't know. It saves a little bit of Biden's face. I mean, right now it's egg on his face. But if he lets it go, and if it comes out later that it was way worse than that, then it's going to look even worse, like Biden's covering it. So, I mean, which I think that he was trying to be there to cover it a little bit. And Eric Lander's saying maybe that his team is saying like, hey, if you stay on, it's going to prompt an even more indulgent investigation, a deep dive, and it might turn up some things that we can't just quick resign and stay out of the public eye and be fine with. So you should resign.
I don't know. I mean, because dude did, I don't know. I mean, because it sounded like Biden was basically backing the guy the first time around. And so I don't know. I mean, look, I agree with you that him leaving, I guess it kind of gets rid of the issue in general. But I think it draws the spotlight around it. I mean, the fact that he's leaving, I mean, it's not, I mean, because all things being equal, it's not the greatest thing in the world to hear that somebody was basically being abusive and belligerent and that your administration was supposed to have a zero tolerance policy against it, basically kept the guy on, or at the very least was willing to kind of go to the mat for the guy. None of that looks good. And all of that stuff comes out the moment that the guy is fired. At least I think so. But to your point, it may tamp it down in a way that it wouldn't have if the guy had stayed. So I don't know. I don't know. I think it sounds bad on its face as is, whether it's embellished or not.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit of a cynic on it, a little bit more than you are. I think that it was probably more than just words, because right now you can get away with saying just words. I think he probably, maybe not abusive physically, but abusive as in like asking them to do way worse or way questionable ethical things, giving them way more work than they are paid for or should be doing, kind of getting away with some things like that, maybe passing up people for promotions and hitting different people. So yeah. But, the other part of this is the highest profile departure of the Biden team. So
is it
right now? Yes. And I don't think this is relatively high when it comes to departures. I mean, we could be talking about Psaki here. We could be talking about Blinken. We could be talking about Fauci.
Yeah.
All of them would have been
talking about Fauci.
We should be. Yeah. That's what I was going with this. I mean, this is his top science advisor. So the man who represents science himself, if you're looking for a reset, why isn't this Fauci we're talking about?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. I mean, I guess Fauci wasn't being belligerent to his staff more than anything else. Fauci just couldn't be honest. But I don't.
So when email links come out that you're funding gain of function research after demonizing it in China, you're fine.
Yeah, that should have been enough.
But if we're to believe this headline, if we're to believe what the White House is saying, but if you talk a little meanly to your staff, then you're gone.
I feel you. I mean, I don't know. I mean, for whatever reason, look, I would have fired Fauci, honestly. I mean, at the point where the emails came out, where he knew. I mean, think of the number of people that COVID has killed. What, 800 and some thousand? We're almost at 900,000. I think we are at 900,000.
Yeah.
And with meaning there's a huge amount of significance and gravity associated with COVID. Okay, so fair enough. We find out that COVID comes out, and we find out that Fauci, instead of just being honest about it with the notion that, yes, it could be a lab leak, yes, it could be something that's in a while, but we don't necessarily know, Fauci puts his finger on the scale in order to make people who say this is a lab leak, make those people look like they were crazy. And media runs with it. Media runs with it whole hog to the point where anybody who's bringing up this kind of lab leak thing gets laughed at, joke, it's fake news and everything. And you find out not only is it not fake news, but it is just as viable as an option, if not more so, than the thing that just came out of natural transmission. And you find out that Fauci was the guy who was basically putting his thumb on a scale in order to shape public perspective on that stuff going forward. Yeah, that's a fireable offense to me. I mean, and, this guy might be belligerent and everything else to his staff. So if he needs to leave, he needs to leave. But if you are legitimately trying for a reset, getting rid of Fauci was the guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
just saying.
I think most people at this point can agree on both sides of the aisle. Let's get rid of him. So it's just, I don't know. It's weird that he's sticking around. But we do have our guest ready to go. You're not going to want to miss this one. But for now, we're going to head into a break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. We'll be right back after this.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys just so happen to find yourself in the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Austin and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. I mentioned this early for the monologue, and I also mentioned this with Ted Rall, but Joe Biden has basically created a workers' task force. Now, the workers' task force, Biden created this through an executive order, and it was supposed to submit recommendations within 180 days. And so those recommendations have basically been submitted on Monday. And the point that I want to make here is there's a difference between, let's say, putting a task force with recommendations versus backing something like the PRO Act. The PRO Act would have directly benefited workers and would have directly pushed for unionization in this country. The task force are just recommendations. And it's unclear if Biden would accept any of these recommendations, let alone all of them. The key point here that I kind of want to nail down is that this is the escalation of optics over action. Action is the PRO Act. Optics and wanting to get credit for something that you didn't necessarily do is a task force. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with John Logan, or Professor John Logan. Professor Logan is Professor and Director of Labor and Employment Studies at San Francisco State University and a visiting research associate at the University of California, Berkeley Labor Center. He's published widely on the right to organize, employer opposition to unions in the United States and globally, and has worked on research projects with unions in over 20 different countries. Professor Logan, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm good. Glad to be on.
Absolutely. Glad to have you on. So from the standpoint of this labor, the task force, from your standpoint, am I being too hard on Biden on this? I mean, from my standpoint, if you really wanted to do something about unions and you wanted to kind of proliferate unions and protect unions in the United States, the PRO Act would have been the thing to do that. And from my take, Biden understands that corporations and businesses and the wealthy that basically contribute to the Democratic Party does not want this to go through. And so because he said he'd back it and everything else, what he will do is give the optics of, here are my recommendations. What he will not do is put his presidential weight in a bully pulpit behind something that may adversely affect his party later on in regards to basically donations from these various businesses and these various wealthy elites. What is your thought on this? I mean, am I wrong on that? Meaning thinking that, no, the PRO Act is what Biden should have pushed for. This is just optics. What are your thoughts?
The PRO Act is definitely what unions want. I mean, you're absolutely right about that. And the issue is there's now, 9 months left to get some labor law reform. after the midterms, Democrats might lose control of the House. The issue would be completely dead. It might be completely dead. Biden promised to be the most pro-union president in American history, and he has done certain things. So you can point to the $1 trillion infrastructure package that promises to create union jobs in construction, that he publicly supported the workers at the last Amazon election, that he's appointed union advocates to the National Labor Relations Board, to the Department of Labor, that he's sought different ways to use executive power to advance organizing, all of these different things. I mean, the problem for unions is those are incremental and limited. The task force recommendations that you just mentioned, they're all very well and fine. I mean, if you read the report, it says very clearly unions benefit everyone. We need to strengthen the right to choose a union and bargain collectively in the United States, but they only affect federal employees or private sector employees who are working on projects funded by federal dollars. And almost everything that Biden has done can possibly be undone. Future Republican administration that is hostile to unions. So, as you said, in order to have lasting, meaningful reform that will benefit unions and benefit workers who want to form unions. I mean, we know all of the poll evidence suggests there's a huge number of workers out there who would like to have union representation but can't get it because of the way that labor laws currently operate, that they allow corporations like Amazon to bully and intimidate workers who want to form a union. So the only way of getting that is through labor law reform. The PRO Act, as you know, so the other thing about the PRO Act, one could argue that if, Obama had been anything like as pro-union as Biden, we might have gotten labor law reform in 2009, 2010. So Biden, can't even get the Build Back Better bill because of opposition with his own party. He can't get it back. He tried to include some things from the PRO Act in Build Back Better, including monetary penalties, giving the National Labor Relations Board the ability to impose monetary penalties on employers who violate workers' right to form a union. That would be something. That would be a big improvement. I mean, it's very far from everything we need, but it would be a meaningful step forward. But, yeah, at the moment, it looks like even that might be a lost cause.
John, do you think Biden's statements on this actually help him? Do you think this is seen by the general public? I know that you literally have written on this topic, but to the general public, is this Biden fighting for a cause that he promised he would, or is it just, just empty promises again?
Well, I mean, as you know, union support was key to Biden's victory in the last election, key to him winning in places like Michigan, Wisconsin, arguably even, Arizona, certainly Nevada, etc. But, a majority of union households in Pennsylvania and Ohio voted for Trump. So, it's not something that you can take for granted. The Democratic Party has to be really concerned about winning the support of union households just because of, the critical importance of those sort of key upper Midwestern states where union votes do play a really important role. Again, rhetorically, in terms of using the bully pulpit of the office, a lot of people would argue that Biden has done more than, almost any other, Democratic president, maybe since FDR. But he just can't get the one thing that unions really need. He's incapable of delivering. That, it's a missed opportunity. It may be a failure of imagination on the part of the Biden administration on how to go about getting these things. But, the reality is, as I said, he can't get key pieces of his policy agenda enacted, because as we all know, you had 3 Democrats, 2 in Arizona and Warner in Virginia, who refused to sign up for the PRO Act. And then, perhaps more importantly, you had Manchin and Sinema who said, even if you get 50 votes for it, we're not challenging the filibuster. So, it's just, it's in one way, it's a huge disappointment, I think, for unions if they don't get anything. As I said, even if they got parts of the PRO Act, they would be able to point to that. They'd be able to say, look, we didn't get all we wanted, but we got something really meaningful. But at the moment, as I say, the problem is everything that they've gotten, may be good and, may be positive, and, the appointments to key agencies, definitely very positive, but it's so limited because, it only has an impact on a very small number of workers, or it can be immediately undone by, a new administration, sort of hostile to organized labor. So, without legislation, we're not going to see the kinds of, meaningful change that would allow those tens of millions of workers out there who say they would like union representation. They're not going to get it unless you get some sort of fundamental transformative labor law reform. And, at the moment, unfortunately, we're as far away from ever as getting that. Whether or not Biden's done enough to demonstrate that he's really on the side of organized labor, that he really supports unions, to motivate people to come out in large numbers in the midterm elections. I mean, that remains to be seen. And as I said, they can't take it for granted because, these are like, really, really, really critical votes, in determining the outcome in places like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania.
Oh, yeah.
It's unlikely that they'll win Ohio. So, it's a constituency that he really, really needs. And, he's done a lot to support, building trades, construction unions. Marty Walsh, obviously, the Secretary of Labor, also comes from that background. He probably will get support from those constituencies. The AFL will be behind him, even if it's, disappointed that it hasn't, resulted.
But should they? I mean, Professor Logan, should they be behind him, though? I mean, and the reason why I'm asking this, I get Republicans are horrendous, but it seems like we've developed this pattern in the United States where Republicans would go after unions whole hog. I mean, would put, everything in their power to go after unions, especially when unions were kind of the Democrats' money arm. When unions were giving Democrats all of this money and everything else, and they would attack them knowing that was basically one of Democrats' funding mechanisms. Not just that, but their muscle to get out there and try to get people to vote and everything else. But you would have the situation where when Democrats would get in office, they just wouldn't do anything. So you'd have one party that was hostile and the other party was neutral. And so unions basically kept getting pushed to the background. And so when they started getting more boisterous and more loud or louder, saying, look, you need to pay attention to us. You depend on us to get elected. Well, you need to show something for that. Should they be so reflexive in support of Democrats if Democrats aren't necessarily going to be willing to go to the mat for them? And how can unions, unless they can enforce that level of accountability, how can unions ever really get anything accomplished politically if they're not willing to go there?
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I mean, historically, there's, I think, probably very little doubt that unions might be in a better position if there had been some question mark, beside their support for unions. If the Democrats had not been able to take the support of the AFL-CIO and the really big affiliates for granted, to the extent that they did, because there have been plenty of missed opportunities in the past where the Obama administration, whatever one thinks of Obama, however much one might admire some of the things that he did. If you look at his memoir, there's not even a mention of the Employee Free Choice Act, which was the labor law reform initiative equivalent to the PRO Act, more limited than PRO Act even. Obama didn't lift a finger to pass the Employee Free Choice Act. So there's no question, as you said, that Republicans know the importance of the unions to the labor movement, to the Democratic Party. They've been very good at going for the jugular when it comes to trying to crush unions, trying to cut off their ability to financially and otherwise support the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party has not been able to do, or has been unwilling to do the same when it gets into power. The problem for unions is that, at this point, participating in politics is not really, an optional thing. It's really, if you don't and you lose, then you're dead. I mean, it really is a sort of existential question. I mean, we've seen this, for prior even to the election of Scott Walker in Wisconsin, but we saw it when the Republicans in 2010 were so successful at the state level, winning governorships, winning other races, that they immediately went after public sector unions in particular, but really relentlessly, passed anti-collective bargaining laws for public sector unions at the state level, passed right-to-work laws at the state level. They had a plan, and they were very effective at executing it. As you said, unfortunately, Democrats have not been able to do the same. I think Biden, as I said, I think he, in some ways, he has been an improvement in that respect over previous Democratic administrations. You can point to things that he actually has done that are within his power to demonstrate his pro-union credentials. If the Obama administration had been anything like this, I think we may well have gotten the Employee Free Choice Act. Maybe it's just too little, too late. Obviously, I hope that's not the case. The other thing I would say is it's not going to happen by itself. It's going to require organizing campaigns like Starbucks, like Amazon. The union may not be successful in Amazon, but they are going to have to take off. They're going to have to light a fuse amongst people, young people in particular, who want to form unions. And, if we got that, generated a sense of excitement and momentum and a feeling that something has fundamentally changed in the labor world, if that really took off, then, people would be engaged with the issue. They would understand it. They might feel that they really have something at stake when it comes to labor law reform. And then, perhaps there would be an opportunity to revive something like the PRO Act. At the moment, it really does seem that maybe it's dead.
John, I'm curious how Biden's past, his political past, is affecting his current stance as, he came out saying that he's the most pro-union president that we've ever seen. But on the other hand, 2011, the Verizon strike, he went to the Hamptons. He was nowhere to be found. And that same year in Wisconsin, labor leaders asked Biden to come to their rallies in resistance of attacks by Scott Walker, and Biden declined. Again, it seems like the only time he's really ready to do something with unions is when he wants something out of them. So right now he wants to fulfill a campaign promise. He wanted an easy running platform. In the 1987 presidential campaign, when he was running for president before he removed himself, that was the only time we've seen him on the picket line, like to unions. So is he really, do you think that affects his current perception of being the most pro-union president, or is it all just a facade whenever he wants something?
Well, I think you have to look at, you compare him directly to previous Democratic presidents, Obama, Clinton, whoever it might be. And, the truth is, as your previous point made, it's always been very difficult for unions to get Democratic presidents to live up to promises that they made on the campaign trail. So there were multiple times where unions wanted stronger support from the Obama administration. They really wanted him to speak up when Scott Walker went after public sector unions, went after graduate assistants and teachers and other public sector workers in Madison in I guess it's after the 2010 election, so January 2011, and he didn't do it. He refused to do it. He didn't travel to Wisconsin. So again, that may be a low bar, but if you compare Biden to those to Obama, to Clinton, to other previous Democratic presidents. Again, you can say, well, he did speak up for, the union and Amazon. He did speak up against the Kellogg Company's use of permanent threat to use permanent replacement workers during the recent strikes. Marty Walsh, was involved with Kellogg, was involved, obviously, with the long-running Massachusetts nurses strike and brokering an agreement there. So I agree that, that it's limited. It's not everything it could be. But again, as I said, if you compare it to the actions, the Obama administration to previous Democratic presidents, he's done as much, if not more. I mean, the problem is the seriousness of the crisis, facing organized labor gets worse and worse and worse. So, it was pretty bad during the Obama administration, but it's even worse now. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, maybe last week, we had the union membership figures for 2021. And predictably, because of, where the jobs came back, primarily in non-union sectors, union membership and union density fell again. So, we're down. I mean, last year was an anomaly because of, most of the jobs lost were in the non-union sector at the beginning of the pandemic. So we're now down to 6.1% in the private sector.
Wow.
Large parts of the economy, large parts of the country where private sector unions are really completely irrelevant. And so, we really are kind of at the edge of the precipice when it comes to, the future of private sector unionism in the United States. And we know this, but I mean, the country is really sort of facing a stark choice where, do you want more and more people working, for low-wage jobs, working in the gig economy, don't know if they have enough hours from one week to the next, or do you want to try to rebuild the middle class and have people reasonably expect that their kids will have a better economic future than they will? And if you want the latter, you must have stronger unions and collective bargaining. There simply is no other way. And, we've heard from Biden on unions, but we need to hear over and over and over again, a really stark message like this, that there really is no other way to rebuild the middle class and for your kids to expect a better economic future without stronger unions, without more widespread collective bargaining. But that's, American history demonstrates this. This is the only way. It's the most effective collective bargaining, it's the most effective anti-poverty program we've had, in the last century. This is the way to reestablish the middle class. And, Biden both needs to do everything he can to push for labor law reform, but just to push that message, all the time. Not just on one-off occasions like the task force, like the Kellogg strike, like the Amazon organizing campaign, but all the time he needs to be pushing that message, I think.
Yeah, he needs to nail that home. I mean, when he was even pushing for the $15 an hour minimum wage, well, unions is one of those things that helps push wages up and does so in almost somewhat of a natural process through this kind of competition. Assuming for the moment that Biden is not going to be able to get anything done from the standpoint of legislation, what are the proposals that he's offering that you think will get the biggest bang for the buck, even though it's not necessarily exactly what the country needs, but it would get us some distance? Would any of the recommendations that the Workers' Task Force is providing, would any of those recommendations do that?
So, I mean, the task force recommendations very quickly are basically there's three or so different things. One thing is to improve access to information about the right to form a union, both for federal workers and for private sector workers, working on projects that are funded by federal tax dollars. That's a good thing. No one could possibly, improve union access to those workers. No one possibly disagree with that. I mean, the problem is we need that at Amazon. We need that in the private sector more widely, and we don't have it right now. The second thing, basically is to expand collective bargaining coverage because, there are tens of millions of workers because of their employee status, because they're gig workers, independent contractors, whatever, that don't, and often misclassified in that way, don't actually even have the right to form a unions and engage in collective bargaining. So the task force recommendations, within its ability would, expand the possibility of collective bargaining coverage to things like TSA employees who are currently denied those rights. And the third thing, is to increase transparency about the amount of money that corporations spend on efforts to crush union organizing campaigns. And, this is, as this has been going on for decades, but, the Obama administration tried to do it and then it was blocked and immediately undone by the Trump administration when it came in. They want, much stronger reporting requirements for employers when they spend, hundreds of thousands and in some cases millions of dollars in hiring outside consultants and law firms in order to defeat union campaigns. And, it would introduce a new requirement for any corporation. We should, lots and lots of corporations, including huge ones, who get federal tax dollars if they hire outside experts for the purpose of defeating union campaigns, that would be prohibited. So those things would be good. But again, they're incremental and they can always be undone by any other future Republican administration. I think the monetary penalties, if you could get that, included in Build Back or some limited version of Build Back Better, I'm not going to get the whole thing. We know that. That would be a big improvement because it would establish, the principle that employers who violate fundamental labor rights, who fire, who discriminate against workers for exercising what is supposed to be a federally protected right to choose a union, that they don't just have to post a notice and pay back pay, and only in cases where the worker hasn't found other employment. That's completely meaningless. You need to have meaningful financial penalties on employers who commit those fundamental labor law violations. And even the ones that are included in the Build Back Better would be very limited, but it would be a start. And, so at least give something you could hope to build upon. The other thing that Build Back Better would possibly do is prohibit mandatory captive audience meetings. And again, that's limited. A good start because, the problem is that, employers abuse this so-called free speech provision in the law to intimidate and to pressure workers to vote against the union. Because of the legal situation, because of the way the Supreme Court will interpret this, unfortunately, you can't say employers are not allowed to say anything altogether. But what you can do is you can separate their ability to speak from their ability to force workers to listen. There is no legal argument, no moral, ethical, justifiable argument for allowing them to make these, captive audience meetings mandatory. So you can't stop them from talking, about, their opposition to unions, but you can say workers are not required to listen. And again, that would be limited, but it would be a start, and you've got to start somewhere at this point. So I think those two things, serious monetary penalties for egregious labor law violators, and saying, you have the right to speak out against unions, but you don't have the right to force workers to listen. Those would be two things that I think would be a good start when it comes to labor law reform, and that are feasible. I mean, we should be able to get at least that, if nothing else. Those are two things that should be manageable. If you break down Build Back Better into sort of, constituent parts that mention will support, parts that cinema, whatever, and get those passed at all costs. I mean, you've got to have something concrete to show there's not just an executive order, there's not just a task force report, there's not just, very limited incremental change that can be immediately undone by, a future Republican president. And, greater transparency is a good thing, in terms of the amounts of money that employers spend to defeat these organizing campaigns, not because it would be a game changer in its own right, but because it's a good way of engaging people with shining a spotlight on, what these companies actually do, what American workers actually have to, are subjected to when they try to exercise what is supposed to be a federally protected right to choose a union. The incredible pressure, the intimidation, the legal intimidation they're subjected to, and so often illegal intimidation.
Oh, yeah. Because if you remember, because Amazon, correct me if I'm wrong, they're redoing that labor vote, right? They found that Amazon was, the last time that, I believe this was in Georgia, if I'm not mistaken, and I think I brought you on last time when we were talking about this, but they had to redo the vote because they found that Amazon was basically doing something they had no business doing that biased the vote tally. Am I remembering this correctly?
Yeah, no, Amazon committed, you're right, Amazon committed such egregious violations of labor law that the NLRB overturned the election result, which Amazon won by 71% to 29%, and ordered a rerun election. The problem is, the election, the ballots have just gone out. It's a mail-in ballot. The voting period ends March 28th. The problem is that very little has changed from a year ago. And, even if it avoids, the mailbox that Amazon, basically, forced the U.S. Postal Service to install that had never been done, I think, prior in the history of the Postal Service to, very quickly install a cluster box for a single business client for the purpose of voting in an NLRB election. Amazon was told repeatedly no on-site voting, and it went ahead with it anyway. But the mailbox is still there. It's just been moved to a more neutral location. So the problem is the vote is taking place again, but very little has changed from 12 months ago. So, all of the legal union-busting tactics that Amazon was allowed to engage in, Amazon conducted thousands, by its own account, it conducted thousands of captive audience meetings round the clock. So it reached the day shift, the night shift, the weekend shift. It was, conducting these captive audience meetings, these one-on-one meetings. It was using every opportunity available to bombard its workers with anti-union propaganda. So almost none of that has changed. So, if you had the kind of things that I was talking about, you would at least have a situation where workers could say, no, I'm not attending these anti-union meetings. You can go ahead and hold them, but you can't force me to listen to them. And they could have a situation where if Amazon breaks the law, which again, Amazon alone, but multiple other companies do this, of course, Amazon alone has been accused of violating the law, not just in this election in Alabama, but in multiple locations, in Staten Island at the moment, in Chicago, in multiple other places where workers are trying to form a union. You could at least impose meaningful financial penalties, which might not be anything for Amazon, but they would be something to other companies, and as I said, they would be a meaningful first step. There's something to build on, something you can hold up and say, this isn't acceptable. This is very serious violation of fundamental labor rights. You're not just getting a slap on the wrist. We are going to start imposing very meaningful financial, punitive financial penalties against employers who are repeat and egregious labor law violators. I just don't understand. There's no argument against that. They're violating the law. They ought to be punished, and not just get a slap on the wrist. So those are things.
1,000% agree.
If I were you,
1,000% agree with you.
Priority.
Because at this point, unless something happens, then there's nothing is going to change. And so I totally agree with you on this. And look, from your mouth to God's ears, right? Hopefully something gets done on this. But it doesn't necessarily seem that Biden has the political clout. And at this point, I'm even skeptical if he has the political will to even go that route. But Professor Logan, thank you for this. I appreciate this. The voice that you guys were listening to is Professor John Logan. He's Director of Labor and Employment Studies at San Francisco State University and a visiting research associate at the University of California, Berkeley Labor Center. He's published widely on the right to organize, employee opposition to unions in the United States and globally, and has worked on research projects with unions in over 20 different countries. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. Back in a moment, we'll be taking your calls. The number is 202-521-1320. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly here on Radio Sputnik. We are taking your calls for the last 10 minutes. Numbers 202-521-1320. And right quick before we jump into Tarif here, I had a question for you, Jamarl. I know we hit Biden on this on this meeting with Olaf Scholz and how he's making the promise for Germany while being totally detached from what they would have to go through if they do impose sanctions. That would mean shutting down Nord Stream 2. And I know that we hit him on that. But at the same time, and this question kind of came up in the chat too, isn't that Biden doing a good job? Isn't it doing what we've been hitting him on, actually doing something with foreign policy, strong-arming when he needs to strong-arm? If that's the direction that our country is going to take, that we're going to strong-arm Russia, then we have to get our European allies on board.
Well, I mean, the United States has always strong-armed. I mean, that's not something specific with Biden. I mean, think about what we were doing with Iran. I mean, we had the conversation today. What did Trump do? He pulled out the deal and then tried to force Iran to come back to the table for a worse deal when they were already staying with the deal, and did so using economic sanctions to do it. I mean, even the threats to Germany about sanctioning them, even we were sanctioning France at one point, if I'm not mistaken. And so this is something we do all the time, even with China. I mean, we went after Turkey because we didn't want them buying Russian weapons. Same thing with India. So basically, we use our sanction power for something that doesn't supposed to be used for. I mean, we're basically using sanctions for economic issues when really we're turning economics into geopolitics and into foreign policy. And so this is not necessarily uncommon. I don't necessarily think it's great for the president to go around threatening Europe to go against their own interests. I think it's that. I mean, I'm hitting Biden not because I want Biden to be more consistent. I want Biden to be more honest. I want him to be more effective. But is it really effective when you're trying to get Europe to do something that is not in Europe's interest?
Yeah.
I think that's the question.
Listen, I hear it and I appreciate your response, but I'm not going to answer it right now because I do want to give time to our callers. We're going to Tarif now. Tarif from New Orleans. We're taking other calls as well, so if you would like to comment, please call in. Tarif, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Thank you, gentlemen, for taking my call. First, I'd like to say free Julian Science, free Danger, hashtag no more. I have 3 comments. Julian Science, the merit pack, the cryptocurrency, Ethereum, they raised about over $47 million already. And the deadline is tomorrow when it's going to cease, and they're going to auction off whatever they're going to auction off. I think this is my opinion, I think they should start producing commercials showing what Julian Science is a good reporter, journalist, and and running it here on the airwaves here on the radio stations, or maybe prime time, if they can do it. My second comment, Putin. I was reading something from Pepe Escobar, and he was saying that Putin is trying to, don't want Ukraine to become part of NATO. Because if they become part of NATO and they try to attack Crimea, then it's going to be, it's not going to be good for NATO, And, you can imply some other things with that. Third comment is dealing with Jamarl Thomas wrote an article in a Covert Action magazine, and I read some of it, not all of it, and he was talking about Barack Obama's father identified as a CIA asset in the U.S. drive to recolonize Africa during the early days of the Cold War. And basically, he breaks down two books from the one book, Dirty War, the CIA in Africa, and the other book, White Malice, the CIA and the Covert Recolonization of Africa, by a woman named Susan Williams. And he breaks down the connections with Barack Obama's father, with another guy that had CIA ties, and some of the civil rights activists here in the United States that was knowingly working with the intelligence agencies and unknowingly working with them, didn't know they was being fooled over here in the United States. I got to finish reading it, but it's pretty good. His name is Jamarl Thomas. He's been on the show before y'all. I think...
yeah, Jamarl Thomas is awesome. He's a great guy. I've had him on as a guest a few times. I think he's been on my show, and I think he's even been on Fault Lines a few times.
Yeah, he have. He's been on BAM, too. He's been on BAM by Enemies Necessary radio program, too.
Yeah.
Y'all want, I can write to him. It's up to y'all. If you want, I can write to him.
Oh, I'll hit him up. No, I'll hit him up. It just depends on the topic, or if we have a topic to bring him on for. I tried to bring him on for something, I think it was a few months ago, but he didn't necessarily want to come on for that specific topic. But no, Horn is awesome. He's he goes into talking about, I don't want to delve too far into it, but he's a great guest. He's an absolutely great guest. Agreed, Tarif.
Yeah, man, anytime, but, if you want, it's a good topic to talk about, little, CIA assets that's in Africa that helped overthrow Lumumba and other African leaders.
That actually would be a pretty good topic for him to hit it.
We'll have to look into it.
Last time I spoke to him, we were talking about, I think it was like immediately after slavery, and how they were trying to get rid of the slaves out of the country and stuff like that. It was utterly fascinating stuff, like his take on history. But thank you, Tarif. I appreciate the call. Let's see who else is next.
Not yet.
Okay, I don't see it.
No, it's all right. So we only got a couple minutes left here. Jamarl, are you planning on being in tomorrow? It's been hard because I haven't gotten the pictures that you promised me, and I've just been seeing your picture on the YouTube box swirling around.
Yeah, it's a little tiny box on the side. Yeah. No, man, I'll be there tomorrow. It will be no issues. I'll be in tomorrow, more likely than not. I don't think anything is dramatically or traumatically bad. I'm not dying.
Yeah.
So I'll be there tomorrow.
Yeah, and real quick, we need an update. How's the move going? Did you finally get cups?
I finally got my bed set up. All by myself. I was so proud of myself. It took like 3 hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like you have to lift the mattress. You got to set it up, the frame. You have to do all that stuff. It was like.
Are you a box spring or a not box spring kind of guy?
Not box spring. I tend to use what is it? The soft. What is it? Cell the foam.
The memory foam.
It helps my back. Yeah, memory foam. It helps my back.
Yeah, but
the box springs were messing with my back.
Yeah, I always grew up with having to have a box spring, and I thought when I just moved to my place, I made the conscious decision when I moved to my new place. Okay, no more of the college stuff. So regrettably, I took down the flags as decoration. You can't do that anymore when you're out of college. So I took that down, and then the question became, and I bought a bed frame, which was great. But then the question became, do you have to have a box spring with it? And I was like, is it like not super adult to not have a box spring? I don't know. I ended up not going with one because I didn't want to spend the extra like $300-400.
Yeah, I didn't get it. We didn't need it. I ended up getting a topper. So basically the flat the foam bed, but then there's like a little topper on the top of it, And so that's all I needed. I didn't need the box spring for it. I mean, I haven't had a box spring in like a decade at this point.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah, it definitely works. I mean, so there's no issue associated with it, but I'm in. It's a cute little place. It's weird being by myself. It's just very weird. It's like after 10 years to be kind of in your own place where you set the entire thing up. It's just very strange. But I want to thank all of you guys for joining us. Fault Lines, Thomas and Pelly. I want to thank the engineers. I want to thank Boston. And I want to thank our producer. And I want to thank all of you. We will be back first thing in the morning. You guys have a phenomenal day. Fault Lines, Thomas and Pelly. See you tomorrow.